The Dishonored series is one of my all-time favorites, a trilogy of games that managed to blend immersive sim elements in a stylish and convoluted level design, combining player agency with narrative consequences, letting the player make decisions that shape the world around them every step of the way. And today, I'd like to take some time to talk about the Dishonored series. I'll not only be going through the story of Dishonored so you know exactly what happened, but I'll also be analyzing and critiquing that story along the way. If you like story-related content, then you're in the right place, as I have many story analysis type videos on a variety of games and series, as well as strictly informative videos on all your favorite games. As always, like the video if you enjoy, and subscribe if you're new for more content like this. Thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video, and without further ado, let's get started. Dishonored first starts on a boat. We are Corvo Attano, royal protector to the Empress Jessamine Caldwin, who's just returned from a months-long voyage. Within Dunwall, the setting and capital city of the Isle, there was a plague outbreak. People by the thousands have been getting sick, so Corvo set out to the other nations of the Empire to ask for their aid in this trying time. Unfortunately, they all said no, so we have to deliver the bad news. Talking with Jessamine goes sideways though, as the guards seem to have left their post only for a group of assassins to come and attack Jessamine. Corvo manages to fight them off, but they also seem to have magical powers, easily making quick work of Corvo and the Empress. As he sits there, mourning the loss of the one he was sworn to protect, the guards reappear and assume Corvo is to blame for the assassination. So they lock him up, throw him in jail, and it's here where our story begins. Already a great start. The murder of an empress coupled with the personal struggle of being framed for a murder we didn't commit makes for a wonderful beginning. But even in these brief 10 minutes, the game has not only teased us with the events to come, but used this brief time to get the player accustomed to its mechanics. The first words spoken are from Jessamine, wondering about Corvo's adventure, and wishing that she didn't have to send him on this voyage, and that she'd rather have him by his side. While not out of character for an empress to take kindly to her bodyguard, the word she uses implies that it's much more than a safety concern. There's almost love in her tone, and her worrying about his safety is on the level of how you would wish for a loved one to be safe on their trip to their destination. Equally, the game attempts to frame its gameplay diegetically through the use of this scene. Before meeting with Jessamine, you can talk to her daughter Emily, who is just as happy to see you. She wants to play hide and seek while Jessamine finishes her talk. If you accept, then you have to briefly hide from Emily while she roams around the bottom floor looking for you. It's a brief introduction that not only establishes the relationship between Corvo and Emily, but it's also a stealth tutorial. When we eventually make our way to Dishonored 2, that game will attempt the same thing but frame it more simplistically. It's a training sequence that also acts as a tutorial. It's a very obvious way to teach the player about the game. But here in Dishonored 1, they hide that tutorial, and you won't realize it until you've already started. The rest of the area is littered with hints that only make sense on repeat playthroughs. Famed physician and painter Sokolov is here painting the leader of a religious order called the Abbey named High Overseer Campbell. Nearby is also Jeff Kunro, and Royal Spy Master Hiram Burrows is seen talking with Jessamine. It won't make sense now, but all these individuals have their roles to play in the upcoming story, and if the coincidence of having the guards disappear only to reappear right after the killing didn't give it away, then they're all up to something. Hiram even playfully mentions how Corvo arrived 2 days earlier than expected, putting a small hitch in their plans. On a first playthrough, all of this rightfully comes as a shock, but revisiting these moments shows how deep this takeover was, and how everything was right in front of you from the very beginning. The game will then flash forward 6 months later. Corvo is still in prison, and Lady Emily is still missing after having been taken by the assassins. Saving Corvo from his fate is a guard who seems to have given him a key to his cell, and a note from an interested party. We'll be seeing these individuals in just a moment, but first we have to escape. As this is the first challenge, the tutorials are still coming, now under the guise of a breakout. But this level introduces its biggest story beat, the Rat Plague. Originating in Pandysia, a continent to the east, the Rat Plague has somehow made its way here to Dunwall. The plague in Dishonored is spread through the bites of rats, who themselves seem to be immune to the disease. The plague also seems to have changed the behavior of the rats as they're more ferocious than usual, even at points forming a collective group to eat a person alive. Last time I checked, rats don't consume a live human, bone and all, so it's clear that not only are the rats an obstacle, but it also reinforces how deadly this plague is. But with enough intelligence, a roadblock can be a helping hand if you play your cards right, and the game lets you see this firsthand as you can guide the rats, distracting them long enough to slip away unseen, or by giving them a full course meal, letting the guards handle the horde while you disappear into the shadows. Eventually, Corvo manages to escape, and is forced to trudge through Dunwall's finest sewers while slipping past any guards he finds. His adventures take him to a river where a boatman by the name of Samuel is waiting to pick him up and take him to meet his secret admirers. This group is called the Loyalists, taking refuge in a bar called the Hound Pits Pub. They recap what has happened by bringing Corvo up to speed. Hiram Burrows, Royal Spy Master now turned Lord Regent, has assumed control of the throne and has been making a mess of the city ever since. Jessamine, for as much as her policies disappointed some people, was not willing to use more draconic methods of law. Something the Lord Regent did immediately, as he instituted a citywide mandate that people are only allowed a certain amount of elixir per day to quell the effects of the plague, and that certain districts he deems too far gone will have to be quarantined. Sokolov has also been creating different inventions to prevent people from entering, such as the Wall of Light and the Arc Pylons, devices that use electrical currents to kill someone in an instant. It's always worth finding the silver lining in things though, as this quarantine has impacted the district of the Hound Pits pub, letting us scheme without so much as an eye being batted towards us. Replaying this game again was quite interesting, as it's the first time playing it since talking about Deus Ex, and it's shocking just how much of that game is carried over into Dishonored. Mainly the antagonist himself. Hiram Burrows, like Bob Page, is about as evil as you can get. While the Walls of Light and Arc Pylons have their uses, how exactly does this promote a safe living condition if the thing blocking you from entering could kill you in an instant? The districts have also had a militaristic overhaul applied to them. Bridges aren't pathways that connect separate parts of the cities, but are checkpoints for the military, and men aren't placed in locations to guard but to prevent. Like Deus Ex, the story of Dishonored is black and white, for the most part. Bad guys are bad guys, and the good guys are good. Things get murky later, sure, but right now it's about being the good guy and killing the bad guy. Now that's not to say that this is a fault of the writing by any means. It worked for Deus Ex, and it works just as well here in Dishonored. The reasons and motivations behind the plague, why Hiram is more militaristic in his takeover, to even why the loyalists want to take him down are where the depth of the story resides. The pieces haven't been put in just yet, but slowly but surely they will fall into place. Talking about Deus Ex is actually a perfect segue into the next mission, as our first target is High Overseer Campbell. Killing him and rescuing Overseer Martin, a friend of the Resistance, will give Martin a chance to control the Abbey, so the Order is on our side, but we're allowed to go about this however we wish. Dishonored uses a play how you want style used in many immersive sims like it. We already talked about immersive sims as a genre and what they mean for the purposes of gameplay in the Deus Ex video, and much of that discussion can be applied over here. Dishonored always gives multiple ways to approach a given objective, from something as important as the level's target, like Campbell, to something as small as how to get over this gate. Do you turn off the gate by unplugging the tank? Do you climb over it using the boxes? Or do you rewire the Wall of Light to fight for you and then alert the guards, laughing as they're killed by their own devices? These are just 3 of the many ways you can handle this encounter, giving the player not just an immense amount of replayability, but the satisfaction of knowing that their big brain idea was actually possible. Immersive sims have always been one of my favorite genres because of how much mileage you can get out of the game. Dishonored has 9 levels that can take maybe 10 to 12 hours to complete if you're going through it slowly, but that 10 can turn into 100 with how many options you're given, encouraging you to run through that level again but differently, just to see what would happen. But Dishonored's biggest change when it comes to the immersive sim style and the story of Dishonored is the chaos system. The chaos system has 2 tiers, high and low. The more people you kill, the higher the chaos. By contrast, the fewer people you kill, or just don't kill at all either by choking them out or just letting them be, will keep you at low chaos. This ultimately culminates in 2 different endings that change the world of Dishonored, but there are a multitude of changes that can occur throughout the levels. Certain chaos levels change the levels themselves. In Mission 6 where we finally take down Hiram, on low chaos he's seen walking the halls of the tower, but on high chaos he's in his study on the roof behind a wall of light. More deaths also means more bodies, and thus more dinner for the rats, so not only are there more rats even in places they usually don't appear, but weepers, individuals who are in the late stage of the plague, appear in greater numbers. And these are just the changes that come from the chaos system itself, things that change as the result of your overall total. But certain smaller changes have different chaotic actions. Here in Dunwall is a distillery run by a gang who makes distilled versions of the elixirs for cheap, due to the regular elixirs being hard to come by. You can, if you want, sabotage this by poisoning their supply. This isn't considered high chaos, but will result in weepers appearing at the distillery, who could kill members of the gang or could die themselves, possibly adding to the counter. You aren't contributing to the chaos system directly, but you are creating a situation that could present that outcome. Depending on who you ask though, the chaos system is either the best mechanic in the game or its biggest burden, both expanding how the narrative is developed, yet also limiting the creativity the player would have had otherwise. For me, both mechanically and narratively, I find that it's the system that makes Dishonored the great game that it is. That's not to say I don't have issues with it. Mechanically, I understand the complaints. A low chaos playthrough requires the player to kill as little as possible, so your only methods of attack are non-lethal, that being chokeholds and the like. Except your options are extremely limited, being genuinely just chokeholds and a sleep dart from your crossbow. You gain access to these within 20 minutes of starting the game and are forced to adhere to this playstyle for the next 12 hours. There are upgrades, but they are minuscule at best, especially when you consider how much a lethal playthrough gets by comparison. While high chaos players will get deadlier rats, wind blasts, and shadow takedowns, low chaos is just more efficient sleep darts. It's a major criticism of the system and was something so pronounced that the devs added changes to this in the next game. That said, part of me does enjoy the message behind it even with those faults because of how it connects to the story. To clarify, I don't like that the playstyle doesn't evolve once it's introduced, but I do like the limits placed on the playstyle itself. Not being able to use Shadow Kill, an ability that makes bodies disappear, sucks as you have to manually hide them yourself. The game also gives you more than enough runes and money to upgrade your equipment, and if you're doing a low chaos playthrough, your entire kit will be finished even before the halfway point. So for half the game, you're being teased. The game is practically begging you to use those extra coins or runes you have in your pocket. And I find that to be the fun of it. The limitations mean that even with all the temptation and struggle, you still manage to do the right thing and not kill those involved. You spared the Empire a meeting with the second deadlier plague by withholding the urge to kill everything you see with all the new fancy gizmos you could have made. So I actually enjoyed the limitations that were put on me during the low chaos playthrough. It made me work for the ending I wanted, ultimately making it more satisfying when I did eventually achieve it. That is the beauty of an immersive sim after all, and the beauty of Dishonored. It's a wonderfully realized system that makes sense mechanically even with some faults. But it's the narrative purpose it serves though that I wholeheartedly agree with, because in some ways it's why the monotony of the playstyle almost works in its favor. Two things can both be true. The gameplay of a low chaos playthrough can be extremely limiting and boring at times, while also being an excellent way of forcing the player to stay on the good path. Not only are you not getting the stylish kills and the flashy moves, but you're forced to stick to the same boring playstyle, and yet if you do, the world heals as a result. It's a constant questioning of morals. At almost every opportunity the game is egging you on, wanting to see if you'll go against your playstyle just for an extra bit of stimulation. Even just a surface level examination of the system answers why the chaos system was implemented, and why the low chaos results in a good ending. Corvo was the royal protector, and assuming he saves Emily, she'll be the new empress with him retaining his old role. Killing half the city in your quest to defeat the Lord Regent would leave Emily in a worse position than he was in. How are you going to re-establish the rule of the empress when you've left the city in shambles? It would leave a major stain on their legacy too, showing that Corvo is a bloodthirsty killer. Now to be fair, Corvo does get a mask to hide his identity so he can kill to his heart's content. But as stylish as he may seem, killing isn't a good look. It would show that Corvo cares only for the Empress and not the people she commands, and is willing to do anything to make sure the royal family keeps the throne. Emily's already going to struggle in her new position, being a kid who has to deal with the rat plague, so it's best not to make things worse than they already are. Helping Corvo achieve his goal of taking down the Lord Regent in whatever manner he chooses is the Outsider, Dishonored's most fascinating character. When Corvo meets with the gang, they recommend he get some rest. It's been a long day and a nice warm bed sounds better than a prison cell. Upon waking up though, he is taken into the Void, a dimension outside of space and time. In here is the Outsider, a sort of godlike figure that many within the Empire are familiar with, but few have ever actually seen. The Outsider gives Corvo his marking, tattooed onto his skin, but then afterward he just disappears. The Outsider only returns if you visit shrines that were built in his name, where he will then give you the laydown as to what could happen in this level before leaving again. It's not even really helpful information too, just merely stating that this person's life will change today and that's it. But his mysterious personality is what adds to the fascination. Someone who is by all accounts a god has gifted us the power to teleport, summon rats, possess people, and see through walls, and yet has no reason as to why? His main reasoning at the moment seems to be for the sake of curiosity. The Outsider wants to see what happens when he gives people his power. Whether the world crumbles or not is not up to him, nor does he care. He could see every possible outcome, but the outcome that ends up being chosen is something he won't know until it happens. The Outsider exists in a place separate from time, so the consequences of the world have no bearing on his life. In some ways, he is chaos incarnate. Not necessarily the creator of the chaos system, but the one that sets the chaos in motion, something the third game will use as a thematic anchor and take to its most logical conclusion. The Outsider, though, asks for nothing in return, only do what you think is right. What that is entirely based on you. Are you using your powers for good to make taking down your enemies easier while still respecting the chaos system, or is it playing into your carnal desires of seeing how much of a mess you can make? Similarly, how are you justifying its use? Are you claiming to only use it in times of need, or do you see it as a means to an end, something you were granted with no real bearing on what that power means? It makes the Outsider's role in the world an interesting discussion. He could be initially seen as a negative light on the world, a blight, an evil god who wants the world to burn. But he's also a neutral party. He doesn't cause the world to crumble, only providing the tools to make that happen. Does that mean it's his fault for causing the pain that the player will bring, or the player because they can just as easily choose not to use these powers? It's something you'll be forced to think about throughout the trilogy. Clearly, the Outsider is a fairly mysterious figure within Dishonored, and it only gets weirder when he gives the player a housewarming gift, a talking heart. Weirder still is that this heart belongs to Jessamine. It was inferred at the time before the second game confirmed it, but yes, this is indeed the heart of Jessamine Caldwin. Many of her comments are based on factual perceptions of the world, but sometimes are real feelings slipped through, which reinforce the ongoing theory at the time. It's about as uncomfortable as it sounds, but it provides a wealth of unheard of knowledge that the player wouldn't be able to find elsewhere. Interacting with it during a level could provide info on the history of that location, while pointing into people could give us info on them. How many of this is possible only the Outsider knows, but it does make me wonder why Jessamine was picked though. It's not mentioned or even alluded to as to why the Outsider chose Jessamine, but I think it's fair to assume that he picked her because of Corvo. The Outsider probably knew about this assassination before it even happened, and knew that Corvo would be at the center of it, so giving him the heart of the woman he was sworn to protect was intentional. As for why he was even given the heart at all, it's likely another example of his chaotic nature. doing the most absurd thing he could think of just to see what could happen. I can imagine it doesn't feel great holding her heart in his hand as it reminds him of that fateful day every time he looks at it. Along with the Outsider himself, the heart has always been one of the more unique parts of Dishonored, something very understood yet unexplainable at the same time, driving home how mysterious and confusing interactions with the Outsider often are. Returning to the story, we're to take down High Overseer Campbell. He's on our hit list for being the leader of the Abbey of the Everyman, a religious order that we need control of. So we're going to get rid of him and replace him with Martin, who will command the group to be on our side. That does beg the question though, if the point of a low chaos playthrough is to kill as few people as possible, what do we do with our targets? Do we just shrug and accept that we aren't able to knock them out and only strive to make them the killable targets? No, Arcane Studios actually accounted for this, as each level gives the player a non-lethal option, saying to the player that a true pacifist run is not only possible but even encouraged. All the targets we're to take down throughout the game have a non-lethal option that could sometimes play into the strengths of the game's own writing, as they often leave these people in worse states than if you just killed them. The Abbey of the Everyman are a religious order that abides by a code of laws and ethics called the Seven Strictures. Members of the order, as well as any commoners who practice the faith, must follow these rules to the letter. Failing to adhere to these guidelines as an overseer will deem them a heretic. This involves branding the heretic with a symbol on their face so that everyone knows that they went against the faith. According to the rules, all members of the Abbey are forced to look away and act as if they're not there, and the general public, even those not involved with the order, are encouraged to do the same. This is a fate we could bestow upon High Overseer Campbell. Knocking him out when he's alone and taking him to the interrogation room lets us brand him with the heretical symbol. While he is still alive, thus going against the point of an assassination, being a heretic will mean he loses all power within the Abbey. He has no authority anymore. The common everyday overseer has more power than he does. He's an outcast, a joke, and even though no one knows why he was branded, who are they to complain? He must have done something terrible to be branded anyway, right? It's a fate that's arguably worse than death, and is a great example of the game considering your choices. As when branded, Campbell will venture off on his own looking for help, only to be infected with the plague, becoming a weeper who you could find in a later mission. While the choices do stop there, it is up to you to decide what you want to do from here. You could kill Campbell and put him out of his misery, or leave him be, believing that his atonement isn't finished just yet. It's a brutal fate that provides the player a way to complete an objective without spilling a single drop of blood, while also using the narrative as a way to create these outcomes, taking into account the structure of the Abbey and their culture and using that to create a path for the player to choose. All things considered, the Abbey seems pretty evil, but their insistence on being this dedicated to their cause is because their enemy, the Outsider, is such a powerful unknowing force. As I said earlier, people know of the Outsider and his magics, but few have ever actually seen him. But his influence can be found all over the place, mainly at his shrines, which are accompanied by runes and bone charms made in his name. For a time, these were thought to be spiritual objects, something people believe would grant them a better life, but the Abbey considers them heresy, even saying that the new technology created here in Dunwall outclasses any need for witchcraft anyway, so why bother? This all started back in the day at a place called Whitecliff, where the forces of the Abbey, who at the time were not as official as they are now, were fighting followers of the Outsider. This ended with the Abbey winning, killing all the heretics, and establishing themselves a proper religious order that takes down witchcraft. They are then, hilariously, an atheistic and anti-theist religion. Their goal as a religion is to combat the religious worship of the Outsider. The Abbey doesn't worship a god, but rather principles and codes. They're strictures, which by all accounts is just the same as any other religion. All religions have rules that teach people how to appease God. The only difference is that they don't have a god that gives them these commands. It's all rather ironic too, given stricture literally means to restrict a person or activity. Plus, they despise the Outsider yet directly copy his methods exactly. One of their practices is called the Trials of Aptitude, where children who they believe to have potential to be overseers are marked by the Abbey. Those overseers then observe the child to see if the suspicions are true. If correct, they're then taken from their homes and forced to make a pilgrimage to Whitecliff, now considered their holy land, and take the aptitude test. It's unclear what this test entails, but success grants the position of overseer, when failure means death. So based on a guess, kids can be taken from their homes and then killed without any choice in the matter. Rather ironic given the Outsider's fate, as we'll soon see. Under the Lord Regent, they've also been allowed to act autonomously without the approval of the Empire and can root out evil and criminals as they see fit. They, like the City Watch, can punish people for anything they deem necessary, like putting a guy in the stocks for 2 days because he was caught peeping on his neighbor. Did he deserve it? Yeah, you probably shouldn't be a peeping Tom, but a religious group having the power to convict the person is the problem. They are no different than the City Watch, with the bonus that they also destroy witchcraft. A lot of this information comes from the game itself, either in notes or just the environment, which speaks a lot to the game's design. The levels themselves are crafted to fit numerous playstyles, but the design of them is what I want to focus on. So much of this game's environment was designed with the story in mind. There are signs of roadblocks talking about the plague, rundown buildings with weepers in them, and graffiti plastered all over the walls. Dishonored, and even to an extent Arcane themselves, really excel in this environmental storytelling. Many of their games employ a show-don't-tell philosophy, offering to let the player experience the game for themselves rather than point them in the right direction. A game like Dishonored has dozens of different things that the player might miss, like how you can catch Piero spying on Callista at the pub, or how when you get to the final mission, if you kill a specific character before Martin does, he'll be confused and wonder who did it. Dishonored expands this to its story, letting the player come across these moments for themselves. Some of them are a bit more blunt to be fair, like right at the beginning of Mission 2 where we could find guards dumping bodies by the dozen into a boat to then be dumped again into the sewers. It's impossible to miss this, but it still contributes to the lore of the world, showing how the world reacts to its events. Dishonored is in many ways reactive, changing and ever evolving with what the player has done. But the world itself has changed thanks to the plague, so the team made sure to design things with certain questions in mind. Like for instance, how do you fight the plague effectively? Well, get as far away from it as possible, which is likely why the tall boys were created. Guys on stilts who are tall enough to not be touched by the weepers or rats, putting quite literally a 10-foot pole of distance between them. The people of the world are also reacting to the plague in various ways. Some are forced to stay inside, hoping to not catch the plague. Others are condemned to their house because of it. A family had a journal that detailed their day-to-day life while hiding out, and it's a pretty gruesome tale. The wife watched her family die right in front of her eyes before she joined them the following week. An overseer is also conversing with his mates about his infection, wishing to be killed rather than become a weeper. They have him recount the strictures just before driving the knife into his back so as to give him a sense of comfort and peace in his final moments. The rat plague is deadly, so the world has to reflect this deadliness to portray it effectively. The plague attacks indiscriminately, so all the districts are affected. Some are broken down and destroyed, others got off easy and are just abandoned. The flooded district is the worst of the bunch, destroyed even before the rat plague came. It used to be Dunwall's finest district, but thanks to the barrier breaking, water flooded the whole area. Anyone with the right sense of mind got out immediately, but it didn't matter. Buildings were destroyed, and people's assets, especially those in its infrastructure, were gone. Now the place is nothing more than a caustic dumping ground. Things have to go somewhere after all, so all the bodies found in Dunwall are disposed of here. And any plague victims are taken here to quarantine with no intention of being cured. And if they die, well, they were going to end up here anyway, so it saves them a trip. As I said, Dishonored is a reactive game. Just about every item and location was taken into account when creating the world. The team tried to think of how a plague might affect the city, how the government would respond to the crisis, and how the citizens of that city would react to those decisions. It's why the city feels so alive, because it ironically creates a dead world where people are starving, dying, and just looking to make it through another day, while those that still have some life left in them come up with new ways to survive, either by scavenging for gear to sell, creating your own cure when the real one runs out, or just drinking away the pain and imagining the plague isn't there. While I've always loved Dishonored for its story, it's the world of Dunwall that's always been my favorite part. With Campbell gone, the Abbey is ours, but Campbell is just one of the many on our hit list, with the next being the twin brothers of one of the loyalists, Trevor Pendleton. He's not exactly happy about the idea of killing his own brothers, but it's what they need to do to take over the Lord Regent, so he's willing to make that sacrifice. According to Admiral Havelock, Campbell's Black Book, an item we took off his person when we got rid of him, shows the location of Lady Emily, which happens to be the same place as the twins, the Golden Cat, a house of pain, pleasure, or both, depending on your tastes. Sadly, it's not as in-depth as the previous mission with the Overseers, but it still shows the depravity of this world and how its people are treated. The Golden Cat being mere feet away from a distillery is no coincidence. Sex and booze go together like peanut butter and jelly. But the women working here might not have had a choice. The Heart will explain that most of the women who work here are from poor families. Ones that didn't have enough money to feed all the mouths at home, so they decided to lighten the load a little and ship their daughters off to the Golden Cat. Some of them were even promised that they were working at a factory, only to be tricked into working at a brothel. They clearly didn't sign up for this, so some of them take their life in response, and it's the head madam's job to dispose of them in the nearby river. The place is also clearly a sex den, and all kinds of things happen here as you would expect. One of the guests is an art dealer who we need to interrogate to get the combination to his safe, which is the route you would go if you want to take down the twins non-lethally. But to do so, we have to pose as one of the women. See, the art dealer is into electro-stimulation, so we have to play along and shock him until he gives up the combo, which means going past his breaking point even after he uses his safe word. Shame though, all this time he thought it was a beautiful woman with soft hands pulling the lever, only to find out that it was the bloodied, calloused hands of a killer. The twins are also just as peculiar. One of them is probably the most normal person in the whole building, only asking for a hand rub while they relax in the steam room. But the brother Custis asks the working girl to dress up as Lady Boyle, a woman who we'll meet very soon, so that he can pretend it's her and punish her for how angry she makes him. One of the guards also takes routine peeks at one of the brothers, likely to catch a glimpse of the action. Quite possibly the weirdest mission in this entire game, but it fits the bill for a pleasure house. The twins may also have the worst fate bestowed upon them when it comes to non-lethal options. Trevor mentions at times how the family got rich from their crystal mines. They employ many people from across the Isles, but it's like working in a coal mine but with less safety equipment. The dust and lack of oxygen from being so far down probably affects them more than they know. So as a bit of karmic justice, we could teach them how that feels. Getting the combo from the art dealer lets Slackjaw, a local gang member, take care of the job for us. His plan involves shaving their hair, cutting their tongues out, and then throwing them in their own mines. The haircut will be enough to make them unrecognizable to their employees, and without tongues they likely can't talk their way out of things, so like their own workers they could just suffer without any way of getting out. While we're here, the intelligence of Campbell's Black Book is also spot on, as Emily is located at the top floor in one of the private rooms, finally letting us reunite with her after months of being away. Emily is one of my favorite characters in this game, mostly due in part to how they evolve her in the sequel, but the way she's portrayed here in the first game is a perfect example of how her decisions affect the world around us. Bit of a spoiler, I guess, but it's learned at the end of the game that Corvo is Emily's dad. This reinforces his drive to find her, not just as the royal protector, but as a father. This would also explain why Jessamine's tone in the opening had feelings of love in it, and why Emily takes such a liking to Corvo throughout the game. Even though she has to be the heir to the throne, she is a kid at heart, and finds her dad's work to be more interesting, even if she doesn't quite understand what he does. As such, Corvo is a direct influence on how Emily acts. When the group throws a party one night, Emily is seen drawing a picture. On a low chaos playthrough, she draws a picture of her tower here at the pub with rainbows and flowers on it. But on a high chaos playthrough, it's a picture of a scary man with a bloody knife. She also has a drawing that she's been meaning to show Corvo, which changes based on your chaos level, and I think the images speak for themselves. One, Emily sees Corvo as her father, the kind-hearted man that he is. The other sees only the masked man, the one who deals death equally. Depending on how you play, the mask is either just a mask or an identity, a reason to hide yourself from the world or a reason to kill. Her dialogue is also more aggressive as a result. Instead of talking about dressing and schooling, or playfully asking if she has the authority to tell the Admiral to stop smoking, she talks about how cool it would be to crash two ships into each other so that everyone drowns. She's taking after her father because as a kid she doesn't know any better. Kids look up to their parents and do things they do even if they're wrong because at such a young age most kids can't discern what's right or wrong. They just assume it's fine since their parents do it, and being Emily's father means we directly affect how she acts and how she will grow up as a result. Either an equally kind-hearted and stern ruler like her mom, or a bloodthirsty pragmatist no different than the Lord Regent. The decision to hide this reveal about Corvo and Emily's relationship until after the ending has been locked in was a fantastic choice. It should be obvious from the start that Emily looks up to Corvo, but when you attach an actual blood relation to them, people might start to care more. Hiding that until the end means the player no longer has a reason to be a good role model, further amplifying how charitable you are as a low-chaos player. Because even without that knowledge, you still wanted to show Emily that actions have consequences, and that being a good and kind person is always better than the alternative. So not only does getting a low-chaos ending mean that you prevented the plague from spreading and saved the Empire, but you also taught Emily compassion, forgiveness, and restraint, all through your actions as a player. And it's this that makes Dishonored one of the most interactive games of all time. This idea that everything should be interactable and that each choice comes with some kind of consequence is something that the dev team took to the extreme. From the chaos system to the choices made within the levels, to even how the levels react to the world itself. All of it is what makes Dishonored the game that it is, and it's only going to get better as we approach my favorite level of the entire game. Removing the Pendleton twins from Parliament gives Trevor a chance to take their place, giving us two powers under our control. Our next plan is to find the mistress of the Lord Regent, but to find her identity we need to find Sokolov, the same man for the first mission. Now despite me saying that my favorite mission is coming up, it is not this one. Sokolov's mission is more focused on giving the player another open area to traverse instead of creating new story moments for the player to see. What can be seen is related to the Man of the Hour. Sokolov is the creator of the Walls of Light and the Arc Pylons, two deadly devices that have done irreparable damage to Dunwall, something he clearly doesn't see. Furthermore, his attitude is based on pragmatism and ruthlessness. Within his chambers is a woman locked in a cage. Apparently she is a test subject of his, who has come here because she was looking for a cure to the plague. Sokolov claims to be helping her, but it seems like he's doing the opposite, saying to his audiograph that she'll die by tomorrow's sunrise. He's also extremely arrogant as he tells the woman that she should be honored that he's even working on the cure at all, saying that without his hard work and dedication, Dunwall might not have a cure. He doesn't even see her as a person, just a piece of flesh, a body ready to be examined, as he calls her Subject 312 instead of her real name. Sokolov is by all accounts an evil person. I do recognize that rigorous methods need to be taken to deal with something like this, but his attitude towards these people isn't sympathetic. If Sokolov cared enough about the people, he wouldn't put them in cages, and even if he did, he should at least be nice about it. To me, there is no sympathizing with him in any capacity, but he is regrettably one of the best minds in the Empire who is well equipped enough to take down the Plague and the Lord Regent, so will need his help before to succeed. His abduction though leads us to the mistress, Lady Boyle, which is where the mission truly begins. The premise was already an easy hook for me. We've gone from one target to two, so naturally now we have three, as Lady Boyle is the name of each of the three sisters. Except we're only tasked with killing one, so we have to find the correct one and take her out. Even worse, the Boyle sisters are throwing one of their annual parties this year, with the theme being a masquerade. They're also playing a game where the party guests have to guess which Boyle is the correct one to win a prize. So we have to sneak in to find the correct Boyle and take her out in the middle of the party. The Boyle Mansion and how that compares to the rest of Dunwall is a testament to the irony that seeps through this setting. The mansion is a large sweeping area that takes up most of the level, while the rest is relegated to the outer edges of the map. Even just its presence alone is enough to convey this. You feel like you need to be in there or that you're not in the right area. It's like seeing the New Vegas Strip from Good Springs for the first time. There's a party over there and everyone's having fun, but all you can do is look outside its walls and wonder what it must be like in there. The front door where all the guests come in has been locked off by a fence and is guarded by constantly patrolling tall boys, while the rest of the mansion is covered by story-high walls that it's almost impossible to even blink over them. This is so that anyone watching from even the highest walls of the nearby buildings can never see what's inside. Why should they? They weren't invited. Equally, this is also to make sure the party guests can't see outside the walls and be reminded of what the world truly looks like. The outside decorations also light up the sky like never before, and if these giant quarantine walls weren't blocking our path, I'm sure half of Dunwall could see these lights. The party is the textbook definition of tone deaf. In a world where the city is dying and thousands are starving, the rich elite are here partying like it never happened. There are streamers, confetti, statues, and large lights everywhere to set the mood. The dining room also has a massive table of food, large enough to satisfy anyone's tastes. And there's an infinite amount of liquor and a massive catfish sitting front and center. It's all portrayed to me as wasteful, and I bet after this party is finished, all the food not eaten will go right into the garbage, even though just half this table could feed a family for weeks. The Boyle Party is a great example of how a level can convey everything it needs to without so much as a word being said. It's only natural that those who are rich and wealthy will be less affected by this, likely seeing it as a minor inconvenience. These same individuals are also too self-absorbed and selfish to understand what the common folk go through, so while the idea of throwing a party during a plague sounds ludicrous, it's actually one of the most believable parts of this game. Parties can provide a temporary escape from the outside world, which is exactly why this was hosted. A way for those to ignore the outside world for just one day, while those that can't are left to die in the streets. Ruining the festivities is going to be quite complicated than just walking in and blasting everything in our way though. Because finding out which Boyle sister is who, on top of identifying which one is our target, is going to be the challenge for this level. The best part about this mission, and a few other missions later, is that repeat playthroughs are just as engaging. Waverly, Lydia, and Esma are the names of the Boyle sisters, but each time you load up the mission, you're given a different Boyle with a different outfit. In my first playthrough, my target was Waverly Boyle in red, with the other being Esma Boyle in white. It lets repeat playthroughs still have some semblance of mystery by not giving the player a chance to brute force it due to past experiences. The tricky part is getting them alone, as each one wanders the open floors of their mansion. Each sister has a weakness that can be exploited though. Waverly is paranoid and thinks someone is going to kill her. Unfortunately for her, she is correct. Esma loves getting drunk and will follow you if you offer her a drink, and Lydia can be convinced to be taken into a smaller, less crowded room if you pretend you're a talented musician. Getting them alone gives you a chance to kill them, but if you knock them out, they can be taken downstairs so you can ship them off to their secret admirer. Lord Brisby here at the party knows of our mission but doesn't want us to kill her because he's in love with whatever Boyle is the target. Instead, he wants us to deliver their unconscious body to his boat so that they can live far away from Dunwall happily ever after. Thank God, this, sort of, has a good ending. Lord Brisby eventually became a criminal with the crime of kidnapping Lady Boyle. He would then, at some point, mysteriously disappear, leaving Waverly in control of the Brisby family fortune, with enough money to live out the rest of her life in peace. From the dialogue, I'd wager she killed him, and rightfully so. The only part that's strange about the whole thing is that the Boyle whom you were meant to kill will give you a rune for sparing her. But even if you kill them, you still get a rune and a note thanking you from the other sisters for basically having enough restraint to only kill one of them, which is a really weird way to reward the player with a free upgrade. Nevertheless, this reward brings with it the conclusion to arguably the series' best mission. With that, we've come to the final mission. We've taken down High Overseer Campbell with Martin taking over the Abbey. The Pendleton twins are out of commission with their younger brother Trevor taking their place, Sokolov is in our hands, and the Lord Regent's mistress has been taken care of. He's lost all of his power. All that remains is him and the only remaining guards that are still loyal, and even then we might be able to tip the scales there too. To end the game, Dishonored uses my favorite trope ever, ending the game where it began, as we're back to Dunwall Tower to take down the Lord Regent. This mission has no gimmicks and no mystery investigation like with the Boyles, just you, the Lord Regent, and a massive level to traverse. As we discussed before, a low chaos playthrough will having him wander the halls of his tower, while high chaos forces us to find a way to the roof. I really like the high chaos outcome though for just one conversation that you have before killing him, which is where you can choose to reveal your identity or not. It has a deep and sinister quality to it, almost as if you're mocking him for not finishing the job, as his insistence on making you confess forced him to not kill you, ultimately leading to his downfall. The non-lethal option is just as great, as it requires you to sneak into his chambers and retrieve an audio log and then play it over the loudspeaker. This audio log also doubles as a confession, as he confesses to bringing the plague over from Pandyssia to Dunwall. with the hope that it could weed out the poor population, something that he insists still would have worked if everyone just listened to him. While not a part of the quest, there was also a written confession confirming that he ordered the hit on Jessamine Caldwin and that the assassin who killed her was a man named Daud, but that's something we'll have to discuss soon. For now, we can take this audio recording to the top of the tower. The guy that's up here in the booth is instantly recognizable, as his voice is the one that relays the announcements heard in every level. So not only did his guards just hear his confession, but the entire city of Dunwall can hear it too. A wonderfully ironic fate. A person who wanted to rule the city is about to be undone by the city, as the Lord Regent is immediately taken into custody, and likely sitting in the same prison that Corvo was sitting in just a few nights ago. Once he escapes, Samuel takes him back to the pub, and everyone is already celebrating. Corvo's job is done, and he can hang up his mask, but for the rest, it's only just begun. They need to be ready for this new shift in power and capitalize on it right away, but for now, they drink like kings, ready to usher in the new age of Dunwall with Emily on the throne, and Corvo sitting right beside her as the royal protector. Congratulations.
Samuel, you move like you've been drinking. Did the poison work its magic? Is he dead?
It better have worked. It cost me a month's profit.
Yes, sir. I believe Corvo has breathed his last. Just as you wanted.
You've done a fine job, then.
Remember, we need the body. If we come forward with the corpse of the man who murdered the Empress, we'll be greeted as heroes.
Yes, it'll grant us legitimacy. We'll be the men who rescued Emily and brought down the Lord Regent and his assassin. You'll see to the body, won't you, Samuel?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so maybe I was smudging the truth a little. We still have a bit more to go, actually. Unfortunately, Trevor, Martin, and Admiral Havelock betrayed Corvo and tried to get rid of him. What's so wonderful about this twist is how sudden it happened. Even on repeat playthroughs you won't be able to see the signs, because there never were any. See, our trio had no intention of betraying us. They actually did believe that Corvo was innocent and knew that the Lord Regent had to go. What got them in the end was greed. The Loyalists had very little faith in their organization. Havelock's note said that Corvo had about 1 in 5 odds of living, which by all accounts is still good, but it's clear they weren't sure he was going to survive. Some of the future notes are received after breaking out have this similar language, like if you're reading this then you've escaped. They weren't 100% confident that Corvo was actually going to get out of Coldridge, but he did and they were surprised. But then, slowly but surely, they got close to their goal and realized they might have a genuine shot at the crown. They wanted to work with Corvo from the beginning, but when they got closer they realized they were left with very little choice. Corvo is a wanted man, both as Corvo and the masked assassin who's been on a rampage in Dunwall. Washing their hands with Corvo was the best move they could make. As Havelock said, it would grant them legitimacy, as without it people would immediately question how they managed to take down the Lord Regent and find Lady Emily. People would immediately connect their sudden rise in power with a string of attacks made by Corvo, and then it'd be their heads on the chopping block next. Corvo would also prevent Lady Emily from being swayed by them. The trio can't directly rule the Empire, only Emily can. But they can influence her decision-making by way of them being old buddies, which could convince her that they have the best of intentions and should follow what they say. Corvo knows how adults can scheme and twist their words, so he'd be able to consult with her and put her on the right path. So by all accounts, Corvo had to go if they were going to have any chance of success. Thankfully, Samuel only put in half a dose of poison in him, just enough to render him unconscious, but hopefully not enough to kill him. Corvo then wakes up on a boat in the flooded district before being greeted by the same assassins that killed Jessamine. These guys are the Whalers, a gang of assassins run by Daud. This isn't the first time we've run into these guys though, and I'm not talking about the intro. When running through Dunwall, there's a chance that you'll be ambushed by them in a back alley. Their base of operations is just above in an old abandoned building. It's unclear what their main goal was here, but it was likely to gather information on us and the happenings of Dunwall before returning to the flooded district. Accompanying this new group of Whalers is Daud, who has very few words for us, but for now puts us in a cell. Before leaving though, he mentions that he knows our little friend, meaning the Outsider, making him an immediate person of interest for this latter half of the playthrough. This mission though acts as a true test, not just for Corvo, but for the player as well. You will eventually come face to face with the man who killed the Empress, and like all targets before him, are given a choice of killing or sparing him. Is this the time you break your code and get your revenge, or are you committed to not killing unless absolutely necessary? Because technically all you need is his key and then you can leave. Nothing is stopping you from pickpocketing him and then just going about your business. If I had to guess, if there was a person the community collectively killed, it was Daud. There is really no reason to spare him, as he'll just go about his business continuing to raid and pillage the flooded district, and who knows, maybe leaving him alive is a loose end you'd rather cut. It's actually this dilemma that becomes the core of the DLC, and why its overarching narrative is exemplary in how it portrays Daud in his past. But I do think it's fair to say that most people at the time did kill him. The other death of this level is also Granny Rags. Granny Rags is a character you meet in Dunwall who has a very strange aura about her. She's obsessed with rats and the Outsider and often gives us runes and bone charms as rewards. She's got Slackjaw pinned down, and the only way to kill her is to burn her cameo hidden in her bed, as this prevents her from reviving. You can still choke her after if you choose, but you must burn it first. This one has always been seen as a throwaway to me. Doesn't really add anything, comes out of nowhere, and it's just largely unnecessary. I assume this was done to tie up loose ends so we don't have too many magical wielding people stalking the streets of Dunwall, seeing as we're already at maximum capacity as is, but it's mainly how Granny Rags' death impacts the story that I have a problem with. Years later, after this is all said and done, a man named Paulo will find her marked hand on the ground. He then uses this to gain his own set of powers, except instead of being immortal, he can only be revived once per day. Paulo is just not very interesting in Dishonored 2 at all. We'll see more of him when we get there, but he's just the leader of a gang. His powers are most likely how he's able to gain a solid foothold in the ongoing turf war that he's a part of, but I feel like killing off Granny Rags just for Paulo is a bit underwhelming. I can imagine Granny Rags being this ever-present figure that always shows up whenever danger is near, something she even does in this game, showing up near the Golden Cat after we saved Emily. This could have been extended to the rest of the series, like showing up at the Clockwork Mansion or at the streets of Dunwall during the coup. But unfortunately her fate is to have her powers taken by Paulo, which I've never really liked. Leaving the sewers leads you back to the pub, only to discover the entire place has been ransacked and that you weren't the only ones who were fated to die that day. Some of the staff, like the maids, were killed by the trio, who then took Emily and headed to King Sparrow Island, a massive military complex built by the Lord Regent after he took the throne. This is where the chaos system comes into play and all your choices come to a head. Playing on low chaos starts on a sunny day, with high chaos being on a stormy night, reflecting the emotions of those you influenced. From here on, it's all about finding Havelock and getting Emily, but their fates are based on your past actions. In low chaos, all three were drinking together in the tower, but it seems like Havelock took his greed even further and poisoned Martin and Trevor, leaving him as the only survivor. Havelock knows Corvo is coming for him. He doesn't know when or how, only that he is. As a gesture of goodwill, you can walk up to him and talk if you'd still prefer to handle things amicably. If you choose this route, Havelock will surrender, even giving you the key to Emily's room. But he'll immediately turn on you once it's grabbed. Confirming that he never had any intentions of backing down, and that when backed into a corner, Havelock will do anything he can to weasel his way out. In high chaos, things are much more hostile, as the three apparently betrayed each other almost immediately. The aura back at the bar was tense, foreshadowing their strained relationship, only seeing each other as tools and nothing more. Currently, Martin and Trevor are engaged in a shootout and Havelock is upstairs with Emily. But it will end with Trevor dying of blood loss and Martin shooting himself if we get too close. If you choose to stay away from him, you could hear a speech of his that highlights what happened. Martin mentions how they became known to the hits they put on everyone. Killing became second nature, so to them Corvo was just another body, another loose end. A high chaos world is one that is violent and ruthless, where all parties, Corvo included, killed whoever they wanted to get their way. Corvo became violent, and so the Loyalists did too. However, in low chaos, the world is healing. Things are getting done and people might be dying, but only those that need to. Each party feels less ruthless as your actions weren't either. There is a large difference between branding the High Overseer and leaving versus killing every man, woman, and child on your way there. Now, the way I've been portraying this, it sounds like through some mystical magic we can directly change people's opinions on our own, and that's not entirely true. It's the same situation with Emily. If you act out of line, killing anyone who so much as bats an eye at you, then they're going to see you as that person. Corvo has the power to influence those around him, not through some magical power, but through his actions. Or, more specifically, your actions. It's pretty clear that the High Chaos playthrough is the bad ending, but if you needed any more confirmation, even Samuel despises you. Instead of seeing you as the hero of the story, you are instead seen as the lesser of two evils, and even then he's still conflicted on if you are less evil than them. If you killed only some people where it was enough to reach high chaos but not enough to reach the maximum limit, he'll bluntly ask you to leave. If you did reach the maximum value, then he makes your initial approach even harder by giving away your position. So even Samuel, the nicest guy on the team, the objectively good guy, hates you. Samuel on high chaos will even question why he saved you, as you probably deserved to be poisoned, but he did it anyway. If even he hates you, how can you truly call yourself a hero in this tale? This chaotic outcome that leaves behind a trail of blood and death continues all the way to the end. In low chaos, Emily is locked in a room that you need to unlock to save her. In high chaos, Havelock takes her to the top of the tower and is going to throw them both off in a ceremonial double suicide. If you're fast enough, you can kill Havelock before he does, but failing to do so creates another ending where Emily is no longer alive to rule. The Empire, as a result, falls into disarray. No one can take the throne, so everyone is left to fend for themselves. This is also prime real estate for the rats, who likely wiped out Dunwall even quicker than they were doing before. If Emily is alive, she can rule the Empire, but commands the people with an iron fist, getting whatever she wants however she can without worrying about the consequences, just like her dear old dad. The low chaos outcome is both the only good option and the canonical outcome, where Emily also rules as Empress but much more diligently, once again taking after her father. Piero and Sokolov also managed to come together to make a cure that ended the rat plague for good, resulting in a golden age for the Empire. And eventually, when Corvo is old and grey and passes on from the world, Emily revisits his grave and mourns the death of her father, putting a nice little bow on the entire story. Dishonored 1 is a very easy game to call perfect, and it doesn't take very long to see why. It's one of the most perfectly put together games ever made, and it does exactly what it set out to do and does so with perfect precision. It's an immersive sim with an overwhelming amount of choices put inside a host of levels packed with multiple options, both mechanically and narratively. All of this is wrapped together inside a system designed to punish and reward the player for the actions they take, showing them that any small number of decisions can eventually compound into a much larger consequence. Dishonored 1 was largely a game of introductions. Characters like Emily, Daud, and the Outsider have yet to see their full potential, but it sets up everything quite nicely, alongside all of its in-depth world building regarding the rat plague and places outside the game's world. That begs the question though, if the base game is so great, then what does that say about the DLCs? Well, a lot actually, because the DLCs are just as great as the base game, but for completely different reasons. All the options and world building are still there, but it's the main narrative, the central story of the DLC that makes these a must-play. Without it, everything going forward into the series makes no sense. It's these DLCs that set up the story of the events in both Dishonored 2 and Death of the Outsider, and it all begins with Daud. Daud's campaign is split across two DLCs, the Knife of Dunwall and the Brigmore Witches. Originally, I was put off by its design. Each DLC is 3 missions long, but they each have a chaos system which, on the surface, is rather strange. The base game's chaos system worked because it was over the course of multiple missions. The DLCs only have 2, as the third mission is the one that locks in the chaos meter so you can get the ending you're supposed to. I was initially confused as to why it was even added and only assumed it was because the base games had it so the DLCs must too. But that's not entirely correct. See, after completing the first DLC, you could take your save data over to the next, fit with all the upgrades and choices that you made. So it's actually a 6-mission long campaign with a sort of halfway chaos check, which surprisingly adds a lot of narrative complexity. DLCs are great excuses to experiment with content that didn't quite work out the way you intended, or add new content you didn't have time to, and these DLCs are experimental in many ways outside of this episodic style. Daud, being a master assassin, has contacts all across Dunwall, some of whom owe him favors. So for a little coin, you can cash in these favors, such as leaving a rune or bone charm behind for you to collect, or dressing up as an overseer so you could sneak into Coleridge Prison easier. It's a good example of a mechanic needing its time in the spotlight to really test its abilities. As while not a one-to-one recreation, the favor system found its way into Dishonored 2's black market shops, as certain stores have extra things you could find. Daud also has a new kit to work with that either includes slight variations on Corvo's abilities or whole new abilities to fit his style. One of Daud's more iconic abilities is the Summon Assassin, which, as the name suggests, lets you summon one of his whalers to join you in combat. They at first seem like spur-of-the-moment meat shields, and they definitely are great at doing that, but Daud's other ability, Arcane Bond, lets you transfer some of your own power to them. This not only provides more mechanical depth, letting your assassin use Shadow Kill and bend time, but it recontextualizes how the whalers are able to use the Outsider abilities without a mark. Daud is the only one in the gang with a mark for the Outsider, but his unique set of Outsider abilities let him transfer lesser versions of his kit to his allies. So even in its gameplay, the DLCs are trying to clarify and establish certain story beats that the player might have wondered when playing as Corvo. But just as it's playful in its gameplay, so too is it in the script. There's a set of guards sitting by the door, and their conversation is about one congratulating the other on getting a squad of their own. Anyone who has ever played the game would be grinning from ear to ear right now, and I admit I was too. When stalking the streets as Corvo, you'll sometimes hear a random assortment of dialogue. 2 of the most common are guards asking about whiskey and cigars or their squad. It became a sort of community meme almost immediately due to how many times it's mentioned and how forced a lot of the dialogue feels. But it's good to know that after all these years, someone finally got a squad of their own. The tone of the DLCs is much more serious than this dialogue though, and focuses more on Daud losing his grip on himself and the gang. It starts with Daud recounting the day he killed the Empress. Already he seems pretty shaken up by the whole thing. Daud has killed hundreds of people. He spilled so much blood that he could cover the entire Pandician continent, and even then he probably still had more left over. But this contract with the Empress bothers him for some reason. Daud's marks came from all walks of life. Aristocrats, officers, lawmakers, anyone and everyone met the end of his blade. But Jessamine was different. Daud's assassination involved killing someone in the highest seat of power, and that doesn't come lightly. He killed the girl's mother before her very eyes while also plunging the world into chaos. Jessamine's death caused the rat plague to spiral out of control, only to be made worse when the Lord Regent took over the role. This weighed very heavily on Daud's mind. It was the first time he had to think about his killings instead of thinking of the coin that could be made. He wouldn't have too much time to think though, as the outsider wants a chat. He says that his story is ending soon and there's no way to stop it, but does ask how Daud wants it to end. Corvo is coming, and we know how it could end up, so the outsider's warning him of his date with death. He ends the talk to give him one last gift, for old time's sake. This time, a name, a mystery, Delilah. So Daud sets out to a nearby slaughterhouse to talk to the owner, Bundry Rothwild. He owns a fleet of whaling ships, including one called Delilah, so he's going to find him to see why this is so important. Joining Daud on this mission is his second-in-command, Billy Lurk, someone we can also influence at times depending on our actions. One mission has her choking out the guard blocking our path, while the other has her stabbing him to death, depending on our chaos. But Billy is less influential than other characters like Emily, as she has her own path that she'll soon follow. Sneaking into the slaughterhouse is going to be quite complicated, as the workers are currently on strike, but some of the suits at the top managed to take the time card so they can't enter the building. One of the workers, Abigail Ames, was employed here by Jack Ramsey in order to strike the building down from the inside. Ramsey is one of the guests we can actually meet at the Boyle party, who is clearly into whales judging by the mask. So he's in close competition with Rothwild, and Abigail was meant to get in there to incite the riot and then blow the building sky high when everyone was out. She ended up getting caught by Rothwild though while in the process of fulfilling that request, so we have to save her. But here comes Daud's first moral choice. Blowing up the building will kill anyone inside and ruin the business. Doing so, while catastrophic, would give us info on Delilah, as Abigail claims to know what we're after. However, we can instead interrogate Rothwild directly and find the info that way, sparing the workers in business but leaving Abigail in the hands of Rothwild, who will eventually get her arrested for treason and sedition. Ultimately, this is one of the easier choices and doesn't really work as a moral choice. It's almost a no-brainer to do it this way, especially because you could shove Rothwild in a box, put him in a boat, and ship him off to God knows where. There is very little justification for going the evil route in this case other than to maintain Daud's mercenary persona, but even then that's a flimsy excuse to do so, as normally Daud has the morals to only kill those involved. Killing the workers in the explosion is an evil and an unnecessary solution. Now, if Rothwild had asked us to do this, then that could be something. Maybe he's forced to scrub his involvement with the whaler business and needs our help. So we let the bad guy escape just to get our info, while the non-lethal option would be to expose his business practices while also getting our info on Delilah. Overall though, it's not a bad mission by any means and lets the player get a grasp of Daud and his kit. Regardless of the method, Daud learns that Delilah, while a ship, was named after a woman who was friends with the owner, Barrister Timsh. He'll know more about this Delilah woman, so we set off to find him. The corrupt people keep on coming though, as Barrister Timsh is quite the asshole indeed, which makes his non-lethal option extremely ironic. Timsh's mother is dying, and so she wrote a will to pass down. His niece Talia wants the will for herself, while Timsh refuses to give her any of it. Talia hires us to kill him and get the will, but there are a few other ways we can handle this. See, Timsh back in the day was a dead counter, someone who quite literally would count the dead, on top of establishing the next of kin and the price of their assets. But he took this as an opportunity to abuse his power and would take the properties of families and pass them off to his friends and family even if they weren't stricken with the plague. One of these victims was a man named Roland who wants us to take a note from his apartment and swap it with one on his desk. He also wants us to take the bag of a decaying corpse and put it in the vent. The note would be a fake from the Lord Regent, claiming that Timsh's assets were to be seized months ago, and the smell would be our insurance to make sure it smells like a plague is broken out. The place in which we find the corpse, though, is quite concerning. They're all tied up and labeled, and the name of the note, being cultist scribblings, leads me to believe that some of the Outsider's followers were killing people to help with their rituals. There's even a shrine directly in the next room that supports this, but of course the Outsider refuses to comment. He does, however, pose an interesting question to Daud that I never considered until now. Back with Corvo, the Outsider questioned why Corvo spared Daud, given he had every right to die. Daud is much the same way now. Stuffing the body of Rothwild in a crate is a lot cleaner than his normal killings. And the Outsider wonders if the Empress's death really did change him, or is it because he thinks this will save him? Is Daud no longer killing without a reason because the Empress's death opened his eyes? Or does he think that this will stop fate, and that he doesn't actually care about the people like you'd think? He didn't have a deep introspective moment, he's just selfishly trying to prevent his own death. It's a rather interesting question posed by the game that not only forces Daud to confront himself, but also the player. Why are you choosing the actions you do? It's something that could be expanded across the whole game. It's hard for me to answer this question nowadays, as the chaos system does immediately influence how I play, as all my playthroughs for this video were the extreme ends of each side, full lethal to non-lethal. Plus, it's been years since my first playthrough, so I have no idea who I killed and why. But for someone playing for the first time, I think this would be a wonderful moment of reflection on both Daud and the player's part, as they both try to explain why they chose what they did. A surprisingly deep question coming from an optional talk tucked away in an abandoned apartment. But that's always been the core of the immersive sim genre, making a game with thousands of possible outcomes even though the player might not see a tenth of them. Such as this talking statue of Delilah tucked away in the back room. As weird as it sounds, the statue does talk, and it's Delilah talking to Daud about his search for her and that it's only going to cause him misery. But you know, misery loves company, and I'm quite lonely, so let's get moving and find our +1. From Timsh's notes, we can discover that not only was Delilah an acquaintance of his, but that her name was written on the will and not Timsh's. We also discover a bit more about Delilah, and how she's a powerful witch who runs her own coven in the abandoned Brigmore Manor, causing Daud to go back to the hideout and plan their attack. Delilah seems to have gotten the upper hand though, as the gang is soon attacked by dozens of overseers from the Abbey who worked with her to take over the flooded district. This is such a fascinating way to end the DLC. The overseers have appeared on Daud's home turf, and while they outnumber the entire gang 5-1, they don't have the knowledge of its layout. And thanks to our time with Corvo, you and Daud have the same knowledge. It's no longer a takeover, but a playground. They're the ones locked in with you. To make it harder, the devs did add at least 24 guards, all of whom stick to each other like glue, but it's such an exhilarating feeling going through this old area with more experienced eyes. By the time we clean up all the overseers, Daud will learn that it was Billy who sold them out to Delilah. In the low chaos playthrough, she regrets this choice later, but sticks to her guns in high chaos. Billy joined the Whalers when she was 8, so this is all she knows, and when she saw Daud slipping, she knew she could make a break for his leadership role and take over the gang herself. If you were sympathetic in your playthrough, Billy apologizes and gives you the option of sparing or taking her life. If you're ruthless, then you must fight to the death, although you can still knock her out with a sleep dart to get the same effect. It's this moment though that made me appreciate the narrative complexity of Daud and the DLC. This halfway point could then also be seen as a turning point instead. I'll spoil it now, but Billy does survive. She reappears in the sequel and is the protagonist of the last game, so her death is not possible. But the game never explains how it happened. Was Daud nicer and morally conflicted from the start, or did that only start with Billy? Canonically, a low chaos playthrough across both DLCs is just as possible as a high chaos ending in the beginning, only to go low chaos by the end. While the content carries over, the chaos level resets, so you have a chance to double down or double back on your previous actions. That's what makes the DLC so complex. The Empress either affected Daud emotionally enough to change for the better, causing him to question whether the people he kills deserves to die, or it was Billy. Some of the Whalers were losing faith in Daud since the start, but he could pass this off as nothing. But his second in command? That's a wound that cuts deep. It's an extension of our conversation with the Outsider. Why is Daud changing? Why does he kill? Why does he not? What was the impact point? Jessamine is definitely the core of these feelings, but I'd like to think that a high chaos Daud brushed this off only to confront these feelings again thanks to Billy. How a piece of content that takes less than 3 hours can still invoke so much discussion in just 3 missions is shocking, and a testament to the level of quality put into this DLC, the same as was put in the base game. And yet, the story still continues. The Brigmore Witches is the final DLC of Dishonored 1 and is a continuation of the previous DLC taking place the morning after the attack. Everyone is still reflecting on the attack and the blood is still fresh, assuming you spilled any. Whereas the first DLC was about introducing Delilah, the second DLC is all about Delilah. Her and her coven know of Daud and know he's coming, so they're planning just as much as he is. Getting to Delilah is going to be the big objective this time around, but to do that we need a boat and someone who can get us past the quarantine line. The only contact Daud knows of that could pull this off just so happens to be in jail, so it's time for another jailbreak. Like the previous level, Coldridge Prison serves as another playground for the player to swing and run on. It might seem lazy to rehash old levels like this, but they not only added more guards and different hazards than before, but this mission was before Corvo got his outsider powers, so it does end up becoming a completely new level, something you've only seen a fifth of until now. This is also the mission where you can call in a favor to get that Overseer suit. That's because black magic was used in the prison, and the City Watch felt that the Overseers of the Abbey would be better suited to handle this. Judging from the crime scene, one of Delilah's coven was captured, only to set the room ablaze somehow as evidenced by her charred corpse. Our sailor Lizzie Stride is also here, who we need to carry out of the prison, taking the same route we did as Corvo. But this time, the water's been drained. It's such a small but impactful change, as it's something that's echoed across the level. Corvo's escape drastically changed the prison. The arc pylons are to stop prisoners from escaping. More guards are added to every post. The guard who initially helped us escape is being executed. The prison even enlisted the help of the Overseers to use those magical boxes they carry to suppress the outsider powers, just in case someone else tries to escape, and all the water has been drained to prevent people from jumping to safety. So here we are, 2 DLCs deep, and yet we're still talking about the ramifications of choices we made hours ago. Dishonored is a great game, not just because of its world or its gameplay, even though that is part of it, it's because its choices were taken into account at every step. There is a certain level of trust that's built up throughout the game, knowing that there's always going to be some treat in every level, whether that be its design, its story, or even how the same locations evolve. Adding things like this are small, but they add such a remarkable amount of value to a game. When Arcane says that the choices will matter, even choices you were forced to make for the sake of the story, then they will. Oftentimes levels are one and done. You could do irreparable amounts of damage to a place, and yet the world never acknowledges this. But that's not the case with Dishonored. Every choice you make has a consequence. The world does not revolve around the player, you revolve around it. You leaving Coldridge as Corvo while Easy has created the side effect of making it harder to enter as Daud. Even then, just the idea of going back into Coldridge with outsider powers would have been enough, but Arcane didn't think so. Like everything in this game, they asked questions about the world and then designed a level around the response, such as how a prison might act if a high-profile target just escaped from their grasp. And it's this design philosophy that makes Dishonored one of the best games out there. While Lizzie is willing to work with us, we have to help her with a favor before she helps us with ours. Lizzie's gang, the Dead Eels, are currently at odds with another gang called the Hatters. On top of this, the current leader Edgar Wakefield is the reason she's in prison, so we have to take care of both these issues before we can leave. Taking care of Edgar is simple enough, but the Hatters are a bit tougher. Their leader Mortimer Hatt is on his last legs, but for some odd reason rigged the building to be gassed if he ever sees those pearly gates. So we have to either talk our way out of this or hope that we're fast enough to escape once it goes off. He promises us the code to the basement, which we need as the code for Lizzie's ship engine is down here. But if we let him pass on, that would also come at the cost of those inside. It's a weirdly caustic version of the trolley problem. One old man forced to stay alive via a tube, or dozens dead so that he can rest. My mind often drifts towards the kill count when it comes to these decisions. There aren't just gang members in here, but maids and workers, people who have no stock in this turf war. Killing them is obviously not the way to go, yet it seems like Delilah had planned for this. Doing this the other way requires us to go to the basement to get the code from one of the guys who went down into the sewers but never came back. Waiting for us are a few of Delilah's coven, all of whom attempt to lure us by playing victim. This isn't the first time this happens though, as when trying to take down Edgar, the gang members and even one of Daud's initiates comments on how they're being watched. If you're quick enough, you can even spot one of them before they disappear. Delilah knows we're here and is eagerly waiting our arrival, it seems. This is confirmed as much when we do eventually make it to the manor, as numerous notes instruct the women of the coven to disable switches and block off areas so Daud can't enter them. Making our way to the attic gives us a hint as to what she's up to. Delilah, like Daud, was gifted powers by the outsider. She has the same arcane bond power, it seems, judging by her coven, but her other power is much more interesting. Delilah, somehow, can use paintings as a way to control people. That's why the will wasn't signed in Timsh's name, as Delilah likely possessed him through her painting of him. Her current masterpiece is a picture of Emily. Her master plan is to possess Emily and live as the Empress through her skin. Corvo and all her subjects would think they're talking to Emily when they're really talking to Delilah. She is a wand for the throne thanks to the royal family being her downfall. Delilah is learned to be the half-sister of Jessamine. Their father, Euhorn Caldwin, had two girls with two different women. One day, when the two were young, Jessamine accidentally broke something and blamed it on Delilah. But the item in question had such an immense amount of value that she and her mother were forced out of Dunwall because of it. She believes that the right to rule has always been hers, and so she'll take it no matter what she has to do. To do so, she must enter the void and create the perfect painting of Emily, which, as a side note, is such a fascinating art style. I'm not too well versed in specific styles, but some people have pointed out that it reminds them of Expressionism. From what I can tell, it's an art style that relies heavily on the painter's use of distortion and expression to craft something that truly reflects their thoughts and feelings. If so, then the influence is definitely there. Daud's painting is more brutal and jagged, possibly because of the sharp hatred she has for him and vice versa, whereas Emily's is more elegant and free-flowing, less reds and more purples. It's a wonderful art style to have in a game with an already impressive art style. Delilah's art will evolve a bit more in Dishonored too, on account of there being a different artist being hired to make them, and while I do enjoy them, I've always had a soft spot for these in particular. To defeat Delilah, we must stop her from completing the painting. You could do this by simply killing her, or you could swap the painting with a different one. This specific drawing is one of the Void, so instead of Emily, Delilah would be trapped inside the Void. Something I did not know until a future playthrough is that you could actually let Delilah finish painting. If you wait long enough, a cutscene will play and you will fail the mission. I never knew this was possible and just assumed she would loop back and forth between the altar and canvas. Plus, the arena is extremely small, so it's not like finding the painting requires much effort. This also means that instead of putting her to sleep and then swapping the painting, you can switch them while she's in the middle of the ritual, letting you defeat her without her even knowing you were there. The world might have been saved, but Daud's life might not be, as Corvo is still coming and his fate may have already been sealed. In the time that passes, Daud reflects on his actions, now realizing that his choices will always matter to someone, and that eventually those choices will come back. Daud may have saved Emily from Delilah, but he killed an Empress. Each choice comes with a consequence, and that consequence is about to arrive. The final scene is Corvo fighting with Daud. If you ended the DLC with low chaos, then Daud is spared, with him meeting his fate in a high chaos ending. What's great about the ending, regardless of how it transpires, is Daud himself. This whole DLC happened while we were out partying at the Boils and branding heretics. The player and Corvo didn't know that Daud had directly saved Emily from a fate we didn't know about. But that's how consequences work. You might have changed for the better, but the people you hurt only saw the one side of you. If the player knew that Daud saved Emily, then I assume most would have spared him. But since that information was never given to us, we can only go off what we know. But this shows how much Daud has grown. He knows that he might not come back from this, and that Corvo might end his life. But even if that happens, he knows that what he's done was right. It might have taken him a while to get there, and he was only able to see this part of himself just recently, but in his final moments, he did change. He considered the moral complexities that come with his targets. He weighed the options to determine what was best, and right when the blade was at his neck, he even admits to leaving his gang and the killings that would follow if he's spared. Daud wants to change, and thankfully Corvo is sympathetic enough to spare him. Like with Billy, living to fight another day is the canon outcome, as he will also appear in a future sequel. But just, wow. What an ending. A man who went from an Empress killer to seeing the error of his ways, and vowing to do better with the new life he's been given. It's an incredibly well-told story with an equally important message, about how no matter who you are, it's never too late to change for the better. Dishonored 1 is not only a great game, it's one of my favorite games of all time. A game that I've picked up time and time again over the years and yet always managed to find something new to enjoy. Its gameplay is what an immersive sim should strive to be. A game with a bountiful amount of options, stretching across its levels like vines, all of which are tied back into the narrative, a central story focused on loss, revenge, and choice, posing questions about a person's mind, their power, and how they go about using that power. It's a game that is argued by many to be the best in the series, and that is true for a number of reasons. The first Dishonored will always be remembered as a modern classic, a game that would have still gone down in history as one of the greats even on its own. Now, that might sound like I'm playing down its sequels, and that the first game is so good it trumps the rest by comparison, but I wouldn't be too hasty to count them out just yet. Dishonored 2 would release just a few years later in 2016, and the first thing you'll notice upon starting the game is how it looks so much better. Dishonored's art style was timeless, as evidenced by the game being 12 years old. It's a piece of art in itself, something you could hang on the wall at an art gallery. But Dishonored 2 takes it a step further, and there is no better example of this than with Delilah. Set 15 years in the future, Emily has now gone from a young girl to an adult woman and has grown into a role as the Empress of the Isles. Along with her cabinet and Corvo still serving as royal protector, they're honoring the death of the late Jessamine Caldwin. That is until the Duke of Serkonos arrives bearing gifts. Except it's just one gift, one large one at that. The existence of Jessamine's half-sister Delilah. While it's been 15 years since her last appearance, for us it's only been 4, and just her alone is proof of how detailed the game's art style has gotten. Delilah's design in the first game gave off very stereotypical witch vibes, which is exactly what she was, but it never really fit her character, at least to me. She looks like the kind of old witch that you would find in an abandoned hut inside of an enchanted forest, storing a large pot of weird ingredients with her giant spoon. Now again, I can't really complain too much because that's exactly who she was in the DLC, and she definitely doesn't deviate from that path in this game either, but her design here feels more appropriate, elegant. It's the culmination of her life fit in one dress. There's elegance in its design, something suitable for someone who claims to be the true heir to the throne while also keeping that witchy aesthetic, opting to add a fur coat to the back but replace it with thorns and roses. It's a beautiful design, but just the texture work alone shows how much the game's art style has improved. But to back up a bit, Delilah's alive? Correct. Canonically, Daud sucked her into the painting. After some time in the void, she was able to tap into the spiritual power of the dimension and even partially merge with the outsider, allowing her to communicate with some of her close allies. This then led to a summoning ritual where she was able to return to the land of the living, with the added bonus of not being able to die thanks to putting her soul into a statue. That's why when the entire court turns on our duo, Corvo attacks her only to shrug off the injury. She also has the power to take away powers, as she's able to take Corvo's mark. So another game, another coup. The difference comes from who gets to fight back, as Dishonored 2 introduces 2 protagonists. The old and lovable Corvo Atano, and the new and inexperienced Emily Caldwin. Who you don't choose gets turned to stone, so you're on your own for the rest of the game. This is a very unexpected choice coming from a game like Dishonored. As we've discussed already, Dishonored has a lot of branching choices, with an innumerable amount of outcomes spawning from those choices. Adding another character into the mix would create more complexity, and indeed, it does. While the two go on the same journey, their opinions and reactions to things are different. The Chaos system also returns once again, giving us at minimum 4 different core endings, with a few smaller changes here and there that we'll talk about when we get there. That's a lot of game to cram into something like this, but what's more impressive is how well it works. Neither of these two felt tacked on and provide enough commentary on things to make them feel distinct. Our journey through Dishonored 2 is going to take us around Karnaca, the capital city of Serkonos. For Emily, this is an unknown region, a place she rarely if ever visited, but for Corvo, this is his hometown, and he can offer insight into Karnaca that Emily could never. This does, however, lead us to the important question of who is the correct choice. Well, according to numerous developer comments, this journey would be taken by Emily, but all it takes is a quick look at the implications regarding this event to understand why it was chosen. Just consider what this means in context of the character we play as. For Corvo, this is yet again another coup. One empress is detained or killed, while another person takes their place. Hilariously, the character you do choose would have been taken to Coldridge to face their crimes of being the secret crown killer. so Corvo would have gone to prison for a second time for crimes he didn't commit. Corvo's entire existence in this game is to provide a sense of normalcy and comfort to the whole affair. His journey through Dishonored 2 directly mimics his adventures in the first game, and his entire kit has been carried over perfectly, with the only changes being related to Dishonored 2's changes specifically, not the kit itself, like adding more upgrade paths to Dark Vision. His role is to remove the one who attacked them first, clear his name, and make sure Emily sits atop the throne at the end. It's consistent to the original game and its plot, but it's too consistent. Corvo was given no capacity to grow because he doesn't need to. He's done all he needed to in Dishonored 1, everything after is just unnecessary. Towards the end of the game, each character will have a bit of introspection and reflect on their journey here. Each of them had slacked off in a variety of ways. Emily had always daydreamed through her meetings because she looked up to her father and enjoyed his life more than her mother's, and Corvo let her get away with it because it's his daughter. Each of them will learn something from coming here, but it feels hollow with Corvo. The best way to explain it is that it's one of those scenarios where you have to let the person experience it for themselves to realize that you were right. You ever told a friend, coworker, or even your child about the dangers of something, but they won't listen and do it anyway, only to realize you were right? This is what would happen with Corvo. Coming back to Dunwall after his journey in Karnaca has given him perspective on how things are done here, and he wants to make sure that the Empire is ruled properly from now on. But from Emily's perspective, she was petrified and then awoken a few weeks later. Dad has once again saved the day, and she learned nothing from it. Corvo could tell her everything he's done and make sure she rules properly, but given her attitude across the playthrough, she likely wouldn't understand it until it hits her in the face. Contrast this journey with Emily's. Instead of being the royal protector whose sole job is to keep the royal family at the head of the table, it's now a former empress fighting to seize back control of her own empire. Emily travels to Karnaca and then gets to see with her own eyes the destruction she either brought upon them or let slide. For a quick history lesson, this is a map of the known world within Dishonored. The large landmass on the right is the Pandician continent, the place that the Lord Regent went to retrieve the rats who carried the plague with them. In the western hemisphere is the Empire of the Isles, comprised of 4 isles: Gristle, Morley, Serkonos, and Tivia. Each isle has its own governing body. Morley has a king, Tivia has a council of high judges, Serkonos has a duke, the one we saw in the intro, and Gristle has the parliament. The Empress leads all of this, with the aforementioned forms of government operating more like state governments instead of national ones. The Emperor or Empress has the single greatest amount of power when compared to anyone else, but they can't just pass laws willy-nilly. Some of these lesser governments have more power when it comes to their own isle. The point being, Emily going to Karnaca is a wake-up call in more ways than one, as she has to confront the decisions she made over the past 15 years. It's easy for members of government to make laws without worrying about the consequences because they could do so from the safety of their own homes, miles away from where their bills will land. Emily no longer has that luxury. The outsider, because of course he's going to show up, even expresses this sentiment himself. When arriving in one of the rich districts in Karnaca, the outsider asks Emily if she feels more comfortable now that she's among her people, the rich and palace-born. Further saying, if not, then why? It didn't seem to bother you before, or maybe it's because it looks different up close. Emily has been catered to all her life, but now that she's out of the palace, she's able to see what the common everyday folk go through. And if she has any sense of humility, this will provide her with a different perspective, giving her a chance to really consider what her actions can mean for the common people, and that maybe daydreaming through a meeting so you could stalk the rooftops with your dad comes second when you're the leader of an empire. It's this single defining feature that makes Emily the better protagonist. I love Corvo. How could I not? And to be fair, he's still a decent character here story-wise, and his abilities let players who really enjoyed his gameplay loop just continue from where they left off in the last game, but this really is Emily's story. But just as it's Emily, so too is it the players, as they're the ones behind the controls after all, and the game bridges the gap once again with its usage of the Chaos system. Initially I wrote off the Chaos system because I found it pointless. Unlike the first game, the Chaos system doesn't affect the locations of our targets such as the Lord Regent. The changes were almost negligible at times, but that's because I was looking at it the wrong way. The Chaos system in Dishonored 1 worked as an influential mechanic, in that our actions affect those around us, either making them calm and collected or angry and bitter. In here it's not so much the people around us, although that does happen on occasion, it's mainly the main characters themselves that are the most affected. Each character is voiced now and will comment about the upcoming mission at the very beginning, as well as make small remarks about certain items that you can inspect, but their behavior completely depends on your Chaos level. One of the targets we have to find is the Crown Killer, who is apparently connected to a Dr. Hypatia. In low Chaos, the two are optimistic and willing to talk to the doctor to see how her connection leads him to the Crown Killer, whereas in high Chaos they want her dead because of her affiliation regardless of innocence. Their attitudes are directly affected by the Chaos system, and remember they have to take these feelings back with them when they return to Dunwall. It's the same as Dishonored 1 but framed differently. Instead of leaving the city how you found it versus destroying everything in your way to complete your goal, it's now returning to Dunwall with a fresh mind full of humility and understanding, versus the journey justifying that the world needs a ruthless ruler to quell any threats that could spring up and keep the people in line. The chaos system works exactly as intended, but just framed differently to fit with its new narrative. You might not immediately notice Karnaca changing, but you will notice when Emily and Corvo are. To finally continue with the story, as we have established, the royal family is in trouble yet again, and Emily now has to leave Dunwall so she could plan her next move. She was supposed to meet with a boat captain named Megan Foster, but she was too late and the coup happened before she arrived. Emily ends up escaping by going through her safe room, a nice home away from home, letting her be a person again and not have to worry about the meetings and bureaucracy. The sheer level of detail in this room though is astonishing, and just goes to show how much has changed in the past 4 years. Dishonored 1 had tons of environmental storytelling, giving the scene a chance to convey a certain emotion owing to its design. Dishonored 2 expands this greatly, and while it can be seen across the game, it's this room where it started to click for me. Emily's safe room has the typical things a safe room might have, like the Empire's reserves, but it also has a few things tailored just for her. There is a long crafting table where she can tinker with her tools and equipment, reinforcing how she's taken after her father, dozens upon dozens of books, because who doesn't like a little bit of light reading, and a few of her old drawings that she made back in Dishonored 1. More concerning though is the audiograph on top of the bookshelf. It plays a heartwarming message from Jessamine who lets Emily know that she's proud of her and is going to do great things, further adding that she never chose to be the Empress's daughter, but she knows that she'll be up to the challenge regardless. This is likely the only voice recording Emily has of her mom, so this is of great sentimental value to her. It almost humanizes her in a weird way and shows that even though she's older now, she's still the same girl we remember from before. That's what adds to the feeling of her being the correct protagonist for this game, as it's her first real challenge. Corvo has been turned to stone. He can't help Emily with her problems, and he can't be there to lend a shoulder. Even if she wasn't ready for it, it's time for her to grow up. Which should in turn harden her, giving her not only perspective, but the willingness and the drive to handle things herself without needing to fall back on other people to do it for her. All of this, from just 20 minutes of gameplay, and a ton of visual storytelling. The rest of the game continues this theme, especially once we visit Karnaca, but we'll need to get there first. Bypassing the City Watch, who used to be allied with Emily, is going to be her first hurdle, which like Coldridge gives the player a chance to spread their wings a bit and experiment with what Dishonored 2's gameplay has to offer. Reaching the docks has us meeting with that Megan Foster. I'll spoil the twist ahead of time though, but Megan is actually Billy Lurk from the first game. It's hard to call it a twist though. If you remember the plot of the DLCs, much of her dialogue gives it away, before she gives it away herself at the beginning of the last mission, assuming you have low chaos. Her inclusion is a nice tie into the DLCs though, and also a wonderful callback to one of its end slides, as it said that she always wanted to be the captain of a ship. Last time we saw her though, she had both her arms and eyes, something very clearly missing this time around. This detail will come back later, so keep this in mind. But the reason Billy is even here in the first place is because after getting her own ship and sailing the high seas, she ended up meeting with Sokolov from the last game, and the two ended up uncovering a conspiracy about the Crown Killer. They believe the Crown Killer to be an agent of Delilah's who's been operating within Karnaca, which is why they set out to the southern jewel of the world in search for answers. This Crown Killer has not only been a deadly serial killer, but it's been the biggest thorn at Emily's side, as according to the reports, all the Crown Killer's victims are Emily's opponents. Ichabod Boyle, nephew of one of the Boyle sisters, along with a few others within his circle, had begun writing pamphlets expressing their distaste towards Lady Emily and the policy she's made. The plan was to get the courts talking and hopefully take this from the small high-class groups of Dunwall to the rest of the Isles. But before he was able to do so, he was attacked by the Crown Killer, who made sure to send a message to anyone who views Emily unfavorably. From the perspective of the common folk, it's not hard to see how this is a result of Emily's orders. Even in the real world, we all think the government hires hitmen to put down people who know too much, so it's pretty easy to assume that Emily's trying to keep her rule by killing all her opponents. In fact, that's actually what they would have been arrested for at the start, either for being the Crown Killer or using the Crown Killer to keep the throne. It's admittedly a great plan by Delilah, as it solves the issue the Loyalists fell into with the last game. They had to betray Corvo to grant themselves legitimacy, as coming to the people with the heir to the throne after the Lord Regent was defeated would pose some problems. So they needed Corvo out of the picture to prove to the people that they definitely didn't murder anyone to get to where they are now. But Delilah was never allied with Emily, so all she needs is enough proof to get the people on her side, and the Crown Killer is going to be that proof. So yet again, our protagonist is being framed for something they didn't do. You know how the old saying goes, if it's nice, do it twice. We never get to hear what policies tipped off Ichabod, however, which is an unfortunate misstep by the game, as I think hearing about Emily's laws could have added to her character. The only ones we do hear of are mainly objectively good decisions that are being washed up by a small minority who can never be pleased. Such as when Emily eventually drained the flooded district, that same place from the last game. Emily cleaned all that up, but her dissenters are complaining that she didn't do enough because it's not fully habitable yet. It's a great piece of lore to add, showing that Emily's not only making great strides to improve Dunwall again, but that her opposition will find anything to be mad at even among morally good decisions. But I do wish the game ran with this for more than 5 minutes though, because most of the game is not so much about Emily's incompetence as a leader, but rather Duke's vicious and obtrusive rulings. For example, Serkonos is known for its silver. It's got some of the biggest silver mines in the Isle. The Duke, however, is extremely ruthless and wants to double and possibly triple production of the mines. But the workers are already strapped to capacity and are working through their own exhaustions just to placate his orders. The dust from the mines has gotten so bad that not only are the workers getting sick, but it periodically covers an entire district, now known as the Dust District. The Duke assures people that all of this is necessary because they're using this to fuel the wars they have with the Northern Isles, like Tivia and Morley, and that he's willing to sacrifice anyone to get what he wants. The story, unfortunately, focuses so much on this that it leaves little room for Emily to reflect on her own decisions. She eventually realizes that letting the Duke run rampant in his nation because he was the sole provider of the nation's silver was wrong, but it's rare for the story to focus on her decisions, at least when it comes to the narrative itself, because she will have to make a decision very soon that could change the entire journey. Alright, that was a bit more hyperbolic than I intended. What I mean by this is that right after Emily boards the dreadful whale and falls asleep, she wakes up in the void. Compared to Dishonored 1, the design of the void is much better in this game, feeling more like what a void should actually look like. Filled with more darker colors and jagged sharp metal spikes rather than the blue, cloudy feeling of the first game. Just like her dad 15 years ago, she gets to have a talk with the Outsider, who once again offers his powers to her. This is quite a unique decision though, because the player can choose to deny his request. In the original game, you were forced to get Blink, but all their powers could be ignored. In Dishonored 2, you can ignore the whole thing altogether. It's mainly for the purposes of gameplay, but I do like the implication of Corvo refusing these powers after Delilah took them, letting him be free of the powers that took hold of him 15 years ago. But if we recall from the last visit, a trip to the Void isn't complete without our charming companion. This is where the game would confirm that Jessamine has been the heart this whole time. I can imagine this feels particularly weird and sad for Emily, as this heart is the one physical part left of her mother, especially given what we have to do with it by the end. With her newfound powers in hand though, she's ready to set sail to Karnaca. While they're not exactly rolling out the red carpet for her, it's pretty easy to see how it became known as the Southern Jewel. Karnaca is an absolutely beautiful location, and a lot different visually when compared to Dunwall. Dunwall was more industrial on account of the whale oil powering the city, which also had a touch of that London Gothic architecture. This time the team mimicked their own location by going south themselves, using places like Greece and Italy as references while also looking at other places like Cuba and Lyon. Karnaca is less reliant on whale oil, thanks to the massive mountain behind the city creating a siphon of wind that the turbines use to power the houses. But that doesn't mean whale oil is non-existent. Oil canisters still exist and power much of the electrical systems here in Karnaca, and thanks to it being a city on the coast, half the city was turned into a harbor. Blood, guts, and viscera from the whales are all over the place, with drains being placed directly in the middle of the city walkways to help drain it into the sewers. Other marine life like the fish are also being dissected and hung out to dry so the butchers can prepare the meat. It's not exactly the most glamorous place in Karnaca. It definitely doesn't portray a very welcoming tone, but it at the very least makes sense given the geography and location of the city. As you move more inland though, the red stream of blood has been removed, and Karnaca starts to look like a traditional Mediterranean town. Bands are playing music out in the open, food stalls are cooking right on the street, while the small businesses take over the rest. Something immediately off-putting about Karnaca though is the prevalent invasion of a species known as bloodflies. The bloodflies are akin to Dunwall's rat plague, with the key difference being that they've existed here for years. The flies are native to Serkonos, as Corvo even remembers throwing rocks at their nests when he was a kid. Bloodflies mostly reside in abandoned housing, letting the homes safely guard their nests from the elements. These flies are extremely deadly and can kill you with just a few stings, but as long as you stay away from their hive, they remain docile. But many people have either been driven out of their homes thanks to these creatures, also being forced to remove them on their own thanks to the Duke refusing to fix the problem, and some people want the leftover valuables that others didn't take when they fled, so the death toll adds up quickly. Getting stung by a bloodfly can cause bloodfly fever, sort of on the level of the rat plague, with the final stage being particularly similar, but instead of weepers, we have nest keepers. Likely due to changes in the brain, any late-stage infected individual feels an overwhelming urge to protect the hive and live among the flies. This strangely creates a symbiotic relationship with the bloodflies, as the nest keepers protect the nest, only for their body to become its own nest once it decays. As alluded to earlier, the Duke does not see this as a problem, preferring to use the word concern rather than epidemic. It's not often this happens in a story, but within the history of Serkonos, it is extremely easy to point the finger at who started the downfall of the once great city. The Duke Luca Abel is responsible for the current conditions of Karnaca due to his neglect and superiority. As mentioned earlier, he's willing to sacrifice people so that he can produce more silver, and in turn more money for the Isle so that he can wage war with the other nations. But the Duke conveniently likes to ignore the fact that he really likes to spend his money on, as Billy puts it, week-long feasts and orgies. The Duke is a tyrant, doing what he can to display his power, while also flaunting that he's the Duke. No two better examples exist than the plaques of the leaders and Billy's past. In Mission 8, there is a tree with various quotes on the Dukes and Duchesses of Serkonos' past. Many of them are heartfelt and caring, like Duchess Malin, who judges her worth based on the full bellies and happy hearts of her citizens, or Duke Cadmus, asking those of Serkonos to hold to your friends, family, and nation and never trade them for silver. Or even Duke Theodanis, Luca's father, who wanted to remind the folks of this great city that they're all equal. Luca is the odd one out, whose quote reads, "When the sun is in my eyes, so are the people of Serkonos blinded. As I exhale, so do they breathe my airs, and if I bleed, they run red." The guy cares more about himself than the people he's meant to govern. This even trickles down to his guards who extort citizens for money. One was reportedly upping the taxes of citizens who live close to the Duke's estate, and one shop owner was being extorted for money, getting threatened with the burning of his business if he didn't comply. One guard even got reported for his bad behavior by a citizen, so he got pushed into a wall of light. His awful attitude and disdain also caused the death of his brother Radanis thanks to a run-in he had with Billy. When she was younger, Billy was living on the street, but found comfort in a friend named Deirdre. This friendship would later turn into a much deeper connection, as the two grew rather fond of each other, Billy specifically saying that without Deirdre she would have killed herself. One day when the two were walking down the streets of Dunwall, Deirdre accidentally ran into the Duke and his young brother Radanis, who was goaded by Luca into hitting them. The younger brother obliged, but the blow was so hard it killed Deirdre on the spot. Without a moment's hesitation, Billy ripped the hood ornament from the car they were riding in and jammed it into Radanis, killing him immediately. Billy from then on was a wanted woman known as the killer of the Duke's brother, but her skills in evasion caught the attention of a well-known assassin who offered her a spot in his gang, and the rest was history. Karnaca is a parallel to post-Jessamine Dunwall in many ways, both heavily subjugated thanks to a tyrannical ruler who wants to weed out the poor and keep the power for themselves. And both have an ongoing plague that each ruler refuses to quell, because one of them was the creator of the destruction and the other could simply not care less. 2 games, 2 rulers, 2 very run-down cities due to their negligence. Damn shame it had to be Karnaca. It's a really beautiful location otherwise. Adding to its name is the Southern Jewel, one of Karnaca's most visually stunning locations is the Adamire Institute, a former solarium turned research facility run by Dr. Hypatia, the one we need to meet if we're going to find this crown killer. Dr. Hypatia is a good Samaritan through and through. She has devoted her life to helping the people of Karnaca survive whatever ails them. She's currently working on trying to quell the problem with the bloodflies, she created a solution for general ailments, and she's drafted up medicines to help the silver miners. She's always thinking of her patients, remembering their conditions, and trying to find solutions to their problems while also making sure their families are reassured that they're in good hands. This is important, as the curveball of this mission is that Dr. Hypatia is the crown killer. While trying to figure out a cure for the silver miner, she tested out a solution on herself which caused her to go crazy, giving her a split personality known as Grim Alex. It also, somehow, has the side effect of her becoming a deranged killer thanks to the personality's lack of empathy. Hypatia is still completely unaware of this split persona within her even after it manifested years ago. The Duke seemingly took note of this and decided to exploit Hypatia to help Delilah by ordering her to kill anyone the Duke wanted who were always opponents of Emily. This would also explain why the building seems less like a solarium or research facility I've ever seen and more like any other random building in Karnaca. The Duke had forcibly removed the people working here. A matron wrote in one of her notes how she was dismissed one random day and then asked to never return. The Duke wanted to keep Hypatia here so that she could be away from her work, as it would stop her from trying to visit the miners and their families, so she could solely focus on killing Emily's enemies. Interestingly, even the people have started to think this too, as a recently published news article claims that the only reason there is no solution to the bloodfly problem, despite Dr. Hypatia stating that one is on the way, is because the Duke has kept her at the Institute as his prisoner, further adding that the Duke is only doing this so that his people can use the cures, while the rest of the impoverished die on the streets. Something that, while not confirmed to be true, is, hilariously, the same thing the Lord Regent was doing with the rat plague. Like the previous games, we have the option of defeating her non-lethally. This one involves us making a counter serum to remove the effect from her body. One argument could be made for the rest of the cast, including the previous game, as to why some of them deserve to die or not. Hypatia is one of the only characters where it's impossible to argue. There is not a bad bone in her body. She is the nicest target in the entire series and is only here because the Duke exploited her weakness, which only came as a result of her trying to help the silver miners. The only thing that could be argued is that her cures are faulty, as the Adamire solution had to be recalled due to some adverse side effects. But even then, in response to the side effects, she not only called back all the vials immediately, she reopened the clinic and offered to treat anyone affected by it for free. Even to this day, I still can't think of a genuinely good reason to kill the good doctor. Less good and more deranged is our next target, Kiran Jindosh. Either through Hypatia herself or her notes, we learn one of her victims was Anton Sokolov, except she was explicitly told to capture and not kill him, as Jindosh needs Sokolov for a specific project. Jindosh is in many ways Karnaca's genius inventor. Sokolov is very famous across the Isles, but a lot of his technological achievements were created and used in Dunwall, such as the Walls of Light and the Arc Pylons. Jindosh is Karnaca's equivalent to that, but much more egotistical. He was behind the invention of the Silvergraph, which is what people use to take photos within the game world. And while he didn't invent the audiograph, which is a device that plays audio recordings, Karnaca's versions are specifically made by Jindosh himself. His most notable invention, though, was the creation of the Clockwork Soldiers. The setting of Dishonored has always been a mix of future technology and older primitive tech. People write letters on a typical typewriter, guards carry swords and guns, and whale oil is still the setting's best method of producing energy. But then there's also the aforementioned creations made by Sokolov. Jindosh's Clockwork Soldiers and Clockwork Mansion are the first sign that the world is starting to evolve. The soldiers themselves are giant mechanical machines with multiple swords equipped on both arms. They also come equipped with armor plating, making sword fights impossible, and their heads have sensors on both sides preventing an attack from behind. Gameplay-wise, they are extremely tough, with the most efficient method of attacking requiring the use of 2 stun mines. You can perform a drop attack from above, but that'll only knock their head loose, causing them to go into a frenzy and attack whatever is nearby. You'll have to do it again if you want to finish them off. Given this description, you can see how this became an easy moneymaker for him. The Duke, Delilah, one of Karnaca's banks, and even some rich aristocrats use these machines. The Clockwork Soldiers are his greatest and deadliest invention yet and have shot him to millionaire status, which lets him pour all that money into his mansion, which in itself is just as complex as the soldiers he creates. Each of the floors are activated via a lever which moves certain objects around the room, letting him change an empty floor into a display room. There are even platforms that rotate, letting him access his bed or bathroom at the flip of a switch. It's an extremely complicated maze of different rooms, which ends up making it an excellent line of defense, as even though it wasn't intended, we have to traverse these hallways to get to him. After about 4 playthroughs, you'll eventually have it down to a science, but your first time through its halls is a magical experience, and that's by design. Jindosh is someone who not only wants to create something revolutionary, but also wants people to recognize their importance. He seemingly derives a lot of pleasure from people fawning over his designs. That's why the rooms are designed to wow the guests when they arrive. It's this ego of his, though, that would inevitably lead to his downfall, as he was expelled from the Academy of Natural Philosophy. It's never explained what he did to receive this expulsion, but Jindosh was known to use humans as test subjects, so they possibly caught on to this. Since a very young age, he's always seemed interested in the thrill of invention. He wanted people to notice his work, and even longs to the day he finds an equal. Competition breeds creativity, after all. But without a lack of ethics, he turned to human experimentation to see how far the human body could be pushed. He was almost jailed for this until the Duke took notice and gave him the tools he needed to succeed, which gave birth to both the Clockwork Mansion and its soldiers. Without anyone to tell him no and an army of robotic soldiers that could tear apart an entire city, he was free to experiment to his heart's content. His main laboratory, away from the rest of the mansion, has different wings you could bring up, with the anatomy section housing the remains of those he's experimented on. Who they are and how they got here is a mystery, and likely one better left as such. His non-lethal outcome is another bout of karmic justice. When Sokolov was brought here, Jindosh used an electrical machine to persuade the inventor to help him with the Clockwork Soldiers, as he wants to be able to mass-produce them for a fraction of the cost. Something Sokolov actually disagrees with, which is surprising given what he's made in the last game. Everything about this interaction is just pure irony, though. Jindosh loves a challenge, but instead of actually growing from the challenge and expanding his creative output, he opts to remove the competition instead. He even tried to get Brianna Ashworth, our next target, to influence him using an effigy. It shows that Jindosh is only as big as his ego. If someone's inferior to him intellectually, then he'll mock their lack of knowledge. But if someone is on equal footing, then he'll snuff out the competition as quick as possible. You can't lose if no one competes. Jindosh isn't arguably a genius. His inventions would create a new age for the Empire. But his obsession with being the best, and his lack of morality convinced him that he can't just be the best, but the only best. As a result, we could subject Jindosh to the same punishment as Sokolov. We can deliver him a shock so severe he receives permanent brain damage. He can't recall certain experiments or scientific properties. His thoughts only linger for a moment before disappearing, and it seems like he doesn't even know where he is. I gotta be honest, this is one of the few times I actually felt bad about doing the non-lethal option, alongside Lady Boyle. Jindosh was a maniacal inventor who lost all sense of morality, even opting to dissect our body if we die within the mansion. But there is a sliver of sadness present in knowing that we stopped a new age of technology thanks to our actions. Technology that could have helped the world and made it prosper, giving people new means of communication and entertainment. But unfortunately, this is Jindosh we're talking about. In another life, Jindosh would have been a hero, someone like Dr. Hypatia but within the realm of technology, using his brilliant mind to aid people's lives rather than hurt them. Someone who would have lifted the world up instead of trying to control it, and it's a shame that it had to come to this. The silver lining here, though, is that if Jindosh does regain some semblance of thought, he could still be the grand inventor of Karnaca, just less ruthless. Personally, though, I think it's wishful thinking, as it's more likely that he'll read his own notes and naturally agree with his past self, but even if that was true, Jindosh is dead by the events of Death of the Outsider anyway, removing Karnaca the chance to thrive under his inventions, but also the chance to be manipulated by his wicked mind. Before we ship off, though, we need to grab Sokolov, who resides in the basement. Emily will take him out of the mansion and back to the boat, but along the way, the player might run into some magical witches. They seem to have murdered all the grand guards that were stationed outside and shoot some weird magic from their arms. A tease of the events soon to come, as our next target is Brianna Ashworth, a member of Delilah's old coven who's stationed at the Royal Conservatory. Before that, we get a brief talk with Delilah herself, which is meant to establish her backstory and explain why she's trying to take over the throne. We explained a bit of it back in the Daud DLC, but this is where that information came from. For a quick recap, Delilah and Jessamine were half-sisters, same father, different mother. Jessamine and her mother were seen as the favorites, so she got to enjoy the lavish life that comes with being related to the Emperor, while Delilah and her mother got the scraps, having to work a kitchen job to make ends meet. Despite that, Delilah and Jessamine had a healthy relationship and would often play together in the mornings. That wasn't until Jessamine broke something invaluable to the Empire and blamed it on Delilah instead of apologizing. Delilah and her mother were then kicked out of Dunwall Castle and forced to live out on the street. She had to scrub the beds of brothels to make money, all while her mother slowly died in pain due to a broken jaw. Her first real shot at life was when she met with Anton Sokolov, who would then teach her the joy of painting. Art and creative works in general are an incredible way to express yourself. These videos are a great example. They allow me to feed my creative juices by looking for new ways to edit, while also sharing a passion of mine to the world. Creativity can be an escape for some, or a reason to get up in the morning. It's often why people try to monetize their hobbies. Doing what you love and getting paid for it sounds like a match made in heaven. But for Delilah, it wasn't the monetary value that art provided, but rather the artistic escapism that came from it. She was able to express herself not through words, but through pictures. A picture is worth 1,000 words after all. Growing up on the streets, Delilah was able to be both creative and sneaky, talents of hers that likely attracted the outsider. In a way, Delilah and Emily are parallel to each other. Both initially started in royalty only to have their mother killed. This forced them to grow up, but because Emily was still heir to the throne, her needs were catered to, whereas Delilah had to fight for herself. But thanks to Delilah, Emily must now undergo the same trials her aunt faced so long ago. Her against the world with no one to help her but herself, facing off against an enemy that doesn't seem defeatable. Delilah wants Emily to know what it feels like to be treated like her. The difference is how she'll respond to it. In this way, the chaos system reflects Delilah's personality. Delving too deep into high chaos, using people only for what they can provide, killing anyone who gets in your way, and doing what you can to survive is what Delilah did to get to where she is. She is both a reflection and a parallel to Emily, two women forced into circumstances against their will, and now it's Emily's turn to see how this story ends. Will she take the route of her father and recognize that people don't deserve to be caught in the crossfire, or will she stop at nothing to get what she wants, but in turn just be like her aunt? It's another example that reinforces my love for this iteration of the chaos system. Just as influential in its design as the first game, but now on a more personal level. One that is less interested in the broader world and rather more focused on the personal struggle of the protagonist. After a talk with Delilah is over, we can meet with the team and discuss the next steps. Sokolov isn't doing very well due to the pain he received at the hands of Jindash, but he's able to tell us who to find next. What you'll immediately notice though is that Sokolov sounds different. Instead of being the arrogant inventor we remember, he's now a calm and relaxed old man. Some notes he left behind on the ship seem to say that Sokolov regrets what he made and that after the plague was cured, he left Dunwall and lived on his own. While I'm all for rehabilitation, my only issue is how no one brings up his past. Neither Corvo, Emily, nor Billy even mentions his actions during the first game. Even at points calling him the greatest inventor in the Empire, conveniently leaving out the inventions he made. I can kind of understand why Emily might not call this out as she was just a kid back then and her view of that game was very different, but not even Corvo does. In fact, his intros conveniently beat around Sokolov and are a copy-paste version of Emily's comments. Oddly enough, this is the one time I would actually agree with the high chaos perspective, as Emily saw his designs for the destructive tech that they were. But even then, once we do rescue him, she says that she wanted to kill everyone who injured him. Dishonored 2 is trying its best to make Sokolov a reformed man. And while I'm all for it, the game should not only have acknowledged his past actions, but also show his rehabilitation in-game a bit more, instead of just throwing his new personality onto the player. Still, him giving us info is a good start, as we're to head to the Royal Conservatory to take down Brianna Ashworth. On the way to meeting with Brianna Ashworth, we start to learn why she's so important and what her role is within the group. Brianna serves as a part of Delilah's coven. She was actually the first member to join back in Dishonored 1. Her notes point this out already, but you could come to that conclusion by the painting in the basement, which is the only painting of Delilah's in this game to use the old style. Brianna's life would have been drastically different if not for Delilah, as according to the outsider, she would have attended many parties as part of the Empire's high society before being forced to marry some banker. Her only moments of freedom then would have been getting drunk at parties and having affairs with strangers. This would have eventually led to her death via suicide if not for Delilah. She called out to women from all over, asking to join her coven, and Brianna was the first. Naturally, the two were together for a long time, doing whatever they wanted, and dialogue even points to them starting a relationship at one point. But after some time, the coven grew and took on a much bigger role. But with Delilah at her side, Brianna could take on the world, and so she worked with her to fulfill that literal goal before Daud stopped her. Once Delilah drifted away into the nothingness that was the void, Brianna used this opportunity to do something with her life. Delilah, even in death, gave her a chance to start a new life, and so she became a curator at the Royal Conservatory. This building was originally built as a collaborative effort between Bristol and Serkonos, and thus showcases the histories of both locations and a few odds and ends from the Academy of Natural Philosophy. Now it's been turned into a campground for the Coven, who, thanks to the Duke's help, also prohibits any travel into the conservatory. The conservatory is one of my favorite locations in the game, because it shows how much effort was put into the little things. Every single inch of this building is covered in something. There was no stone left unturned. Here in the basement is where all the miscellaneous stuff went. The extra materials, the broken designs, the spare parts. But the bloodflies seem to have made a massive nest down here thanks to the building's closure. Surprisingly, Delilah's Coven is unaffected by the bloodflies. They're able to walk around the place without so much as a sting on their body, and the flies don't even treat them as hostile either. It makes me wonder if the bloodflies see them as those keepers we talked about earlier, the ones who protect the nest. Two witches that are down here also seem to be experimenting on a wolfhound, so I wonder if there's a connection between these two species and their experiment. Moving up a level and we make it to the main floor. There are a couple corpses still hanging about, showing that the Coven took this place by force. From here on up though, the floors have what you would expect. Odds and ends and displays of some of the more prolific pieces that they have on showcase. Throughout the upper levels though is dozens of witches. Looking through the smaller rooms points to the Coven making this place their home, similar to Brigmore Manor. There are dozens of beds, pillows, and blankets all packed into one room, which was likely the girls' living quarters. The women themselves are also talking to each other, gossiping about other members and discussing their current experiments. It feels rather comforting at times. That is until you look around a bit more and see all the bloodflies and mangled corpses, some left untouched and others paraded around for fun. Brianna's room on the top floor is just as packed, filled with all kinds of materials and ingredients all used in their rituals, with parts of whalebone and human flesh placed in trays from the strung up corpses in the room. And of course, no room would be complete without a statue of Delilah in it, which Brianna uses to communicate with. It's such a gorgeous level from top to bottom. Everything here felt like it was placed with purpose and with meaning. Every item tells a story, either from the item itself or the placement. Like how here on the top level away from the noise and conversation is a small hidey hole where one of the members of the Coven likes to sit and relax with a book in hand. The previous levels, and even Dishonored 1, reveled in their details, but the conservatory was a particular highlight to me. Dishonored is a game series that begs to be explored thoroughly, looking at every nook and cranny to uncover what was really going on here. But while that explains what they're doing around here, it doesn't exactly explain what they're doing here. Well, they seem to be using a device called the Oraculum stationed on the second floor, as they are attempting to communicate with the Sisters of the Oracular Order, a subsect of the Abbey of the Everyman to hopefully convince them to destroy their organization. Just as Delilah used her power to encourage other like-minded girls to join her, the Coven is doing the same to dismantle the Order. The Oraculum itself used the Abbey's music boxes that they so often toted around along with the corpses of the sisters they killed, with a sprinkle of black magic to obtain this effect. The Sisters of the Oracular Order function more so as prophets for the group's many chapters. Many of the women spend their time studying the world either through history or politics, and use this along with their extensive knowledge that came from their former backgrounds to come to conclusions about certain discussions. Some have hypothesized though that the sisters are prophets, seeing visions of future events yet to come. As such, the rest of the men within the Abbey take their words to heart, acting on their every word. Something I didn't know until a future playthrough though is that you could actually use the Oraculum in this room and hear some of their prophecies, one of which ends up becoming true when we make our way to Dunwall. For now though, the group is only mentioned in a few notes, but come Death of the Outsider we'll see them in action a bit more. The Coven wants to persuade these women by manipulating their dreams. At first it was a struggle as many of the women rarely leave their sanctums, and as old witch spells go, Brianna needed a piece of their hair. This difficulty forced them to come up with a new plan, which is how we got the current version of the Oraculum, as she discovered that you could produce the same effect by using the bones of long dead members buried at the Abbey's graveyards. Even then it was still quite difficult. These sisters are dedicated to their cause and are not easily tempted. Brianna ends up documenting a few of her attempts. One such attempt was being able to keep them in this dreamlike state for over an hour, which she considers to be a breakthrough. Due to the device's unique properties, we're to take care of Brianna before she succeeds, but we can also kill two birds with one stone, stopping her and the device from working. Similar to Jindash, we can give her a taste of her own medicine. By using the ritual Brianna used to commune with the Oracular Order, we could change the lenses within the device and place her in the center. This saps her of her magical power, not only cutting off her connection to the Void, but to Delilah, making her no less human than the rest of us. Not as painful as watching a man's knowledge disappear before your eyes, but still painful enough to cause harm to our target without getting our hands dirty. Brianna's notes give us the location of another member of the group called Aramis Stilton, the owner of Karnaca's silver mines who mysteriously disappeared right after Delilah started making her move. His house is located behind a lock made by Jindash, with the only people who know the code being the leaders of the ongoing turf war. A local gang within Karnaca, the Howlers, is beefing with the Abbey over control of the Dust District, with Paolo and Vice Overseer Byrne leading the charge for each group. Helping one by delivering the body of the other is how we solve this predicament. While it would be easier to simply kill one of them and get it over with, it's mentioned throughout the mission that whoever wins will run Karnaca, so we should be careful regarding who we choose. However, you could choose to either kill both leaders, stopping the war entirely, or keep it in a perpetual stalemate by finding the riddle without their help. Assuming you don't go that route, then you'll need to choose. This chapter of the Abbey is just the same as the ones from Dishonored 1, still overstepping their boundaries and still calling for the death of the outsider. The Abbey is doing an incredible job of continuing to make themselves unlikable, as the first thing you'll see is 2 Abbey members executing criminals they've detained. One of them seems to have stolen food and is being put to death for his crimes. Furthermore, they justify this act by claiming that the crime was witnessed by a fellow overseer who was in good standing with the Abbey, so their word takes precedent. While it is indeed a crime, not only is the death penalty a bit extreme, they are again doing things the Grand Guard ought to be doing. Admittedly, the Grand Guard is no better, but that only came about as a result of the Duke. Luca's father was a much better ruler according to most citizens within Karnaca, so for them it's a leadership problem, not an ideological one. Unfortunately, the Howlers aren't any better. Led by their leader Paolo, they see themselves as Karnaca's Robin Hood, only robbing valuables from the rich and wealthy. What they like to leave out is that not only do they kill some of the rich aristocrats too, but they also kill innocent civilians if push comes to shove. Not on purpose, but if their deaths mean success, then so be it. Paolo does at least have a plan for Karnaca, unlike Byrne. Assuming he gets his way, he wants to organize a union of sorts for the silver miners. He recognizes that they are what gives Serkonos its place in the Empire, so those workers are more powerful than they know. Paolo will instruct them to slow down production and hopefully get the Duke to realize that half the production is better than zero. While extremely commendable, I can't imagine this working. Trade unions are usually more professional. These things are legalized in most countries too, making the process a bit easier. Karnaca, especially under this Duke's ruling, doesn't strike me as the place to have a proper union. So it would have to be a strike similar to the slaughterhouse from the DLC, and like Rothwell, I can imagine the Duke not giving in or just shooting anyone who disagrees. Plus, if he does rule Karnaca, what's going to happen to the city? We'll find out the specifics at the end, as this decision is reflected in a future end slide, but Paolo's methods will likely be more chaotic than the orderly fashion of the Abbey. Say what you will, but the Abbey is organized and have a set of laws they abide by. The Howlers will always be a gang, and will do anything that puts them ahead. As you would expect, both groups are terrible options, but it's missions like these that are always an easy sell for me. I love choosing between 2 morally questionable factions, and we arguably have the 2 most morally complicated factions in the series right in front of us. But complications like this only work if the positives were just as prominent. The Howlers, while ruthless, are doing this to stick up for the middle and lower class of Karnaca. Paolo only started this because the people were being treated poorly and felt they ought to deserve better than this. He is a man who was pushed to his limits. Wanting a better life for the people of Serkonos isn't easy, and the corrupt Grand Guard and the Abbey aren't helping either. Eventually, violence is going to be the only answer, as they thought they had no choice. And the Abbey is still the only faction capable of destroying the outsider. They have the numbers and the power, and while that does mean we are the biggest threat to them, this power we have should not be given out this easily. Plus, as long as you follow the rules, the Abbey has no beef with you. Much of their appearances throughout Karnaca were for good reasons. In Mission 2, they were tearing apart a woman's home, but she also had an outsider shrine in her house. The main issue, of course, is the law itself, something the Abbey could easily exploit to fit with their current agenda. Fortunately, we do have the option to kill them both, which I think in this case is the morally good option to choose. However, if you are in the mood for more karmic payback, you can reenact your time with the Pendletons and throw both leaders in a box and ship them off to the silver mines. Regardless of what option you choose, eventually you'll end up at Stilton's manor, only to find it abandoned. Stilton's still here, but he seems lost. According to the Outsider, something happened 3 years ago that changed Stilton forever, further saying that part of him never left that night. What he's referring to is the ritual that took place between all of our key targets that would eventually lead to Delilah's return. This statue that they built is what she transferred her soul into, which explains why she can't be killed. The plan then is to take the heart, replace Jessamine's soul with Delilah's, confront Delilah, put her soul back in her body, and then kill her. To get to this hidden rune, the player has to use a timepiece, an item that allows you to teleport to the past, the same day the ritual happened. Like the Clockwork Mansion, Mission 7 is a fan favorite, and for good reason. The gimmick of going back in time is incredibly fun, and makes me wish we could use this timepiece outside of this level. The decisions made here are also just as impactful, carrying over the series' tradition of making your choices have consequences, but now with a time travel twist. Things we do in the past change the future, both in big and small ways. For instance, in the present there was a hole behind this statue, so to solve the puzzle we have to break the chain on the statue in the past. A note nearby says that the statue is too heavy to carry, so if it breaks, the staff will just leave it there, meaning it was never put where it was supposed to go, giving us our entry point. More impactful, however, is Stilton himself. To get into his secret room, we need his code, which is written in a book sitting next to him. What you do to him can not only change the level, but the world itself. Stilton went mad after the ritual, causing him to neglect the silver mines and the dust district, leaving his mansion to rot and decay. Knocking him out means he'll no longer be able to attend the ritual, and thus won't be affected. As such, the manor changes to one that's more opulent, with staff now tending to its halls. The dust district is also less run down, likely due to Stilton's influence, so we've essentially stopped the turf war altogether. More interesting is Billy, who now has both arms and eyes functioning again. Billy was a friend of Stilton's, but when he went missing after the ritual, she went to see what happened, only to be attacked by the Grand Guard, which is how she lost her arm and the vision in her eye. So knocking out Stilton also changes Billy's appearance, as she no longer has a reason to search for him. Inversely, if you kill Stilton, he won't be able to attend the ritual, but now his house is up for sale and the Dust District is still in disarray. Billy still goes to find him and is still attacked by the guard, but now the blame is on you. Killing Stilton caused Billy to investigate, which led to the fight in which she lost her arm. So now you are directly to blame for this incident instead of Delilah. If you choose to do nothing though, then everything stays the same and the timeline is preserved. So not only do we have a neat little gimmick to mess around with, but we also have narrative consequences with some of the heaviest weight in the series, all in the span of a 30-minute mission. The next mission sees Emily go to the Duke's estate, as both him and Delilah's statue are located there. We happen to arrive at a pretty terrible time, as the Duke is having one of his weekly parties, so naturally guests and guards flood all the halls. Getting inside the estate is the easy part, finding the Duke is the hard part. The Duke spawns at one of 5 predetermined locations when you enter the estate, so you'll have to check every location. Along with the Duke is also his body double Armando, who will also spawn in one of these locations. If you want to go through with the non-lethal outcome, then you'll need to make sure you find the right one. Killing or choking out Armando will lock you out of this option entirely, while assuming that the real Duke is the fake Duke will cause him to sound the alarm. So you'll need to be extra careful with this decision. Talking with the body double Armando reveals that this guy really hates the Duke. And I get it. Being the body double of one of the most tyrannical people in the Isle's history is a hard burden to carry. And even if this is just a means to an end for him, looking like the guy everyone hates likely takes an unprecedented toll on you, because you feel like in some way they're talking about you even if they aren't. Armando used to be someone before all this, but now that's gone. He actually used to be in love with someone, but the Duke deemed it a risk, so he was never able to see her again. So now he spends his days acting like the Duke, only finding solitude at night where he can relax away from the eyes of the people and have a brief smoke. Working with him reveals a very interesting plan. Armando has gotten really good at being the Duke, so good in fact that he could actually pass as the Duke, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to knock out the real Duke and bring him to his chambers, while Armando calls the guards convincing him that he's the real Duke and the other is a fake. This then leaves Armando with the unique position of actually ruling Serkonos now that everyone thinks he's the real Duke. The question is, does Armando have what it takes? Like the turf war, this decision will also impact an end slide. This not only has the possibility to negate the previous choice, but it could also combine with that choice, making it even more complicated than before. For Armando at least, most of it boils down to whether or not he has the skills to rule. He is the Duke's body double, but how much of that translates to his new position? Hilariously, Armando does have a pretty easy job, as all that's required of him is to do the opposite of what the real Duke would have done, so in that case he would be a great fit for the role. Besides that, Armando doesn't tell us much about his duties or his plans for the Empire, so is he a good option? Well, naturally that's for you to decide, but you should consider that Armando is fighting for control of the same territory as both the Howlers and the Abbey. It's like the setup to a terrible joke. A gang, a religious order, and a body double walk into a bar. I wonder what the punchline's gonna be. Along with getting rid of the Duke, Emily must also take Delilah's soul, which is locked inside the Grand Vault. Only one soul can be contained within the heart, however, so we have to let Jessamine go in order to let Delilah in. While this is definitely a rather heartbreaking moment, I found it rather relieving, honestly. Now, it was definitely heartbreaking for both Corvo and Emily. The death of someone you love is never an easy thing to deal with, especially when her soul wasn't able to pass on and has to stay locked inside the heart. At the very end though, the two can have a final talk with her, who depending on your actions will express gratitude for upholding the values she set for the Empire, or disappointment in how you dismantled all that she's built. It's a bit too late as this occurs in the second last mission, so unless you were teetering in the line already, you're likely stuck in high chaos with no way out, but it does serve its purpose as a wake-up call for those who killed unnecessarily. When using the heart, you'll even comment on the blood and destruction you left in your wake while going through Karnaca, reinforcing how killing in this game affects more people than you think. It's heartbreaking in the end, but the two were lucky that they could have a final talk with her, as most families don't get that luxury. But for me, all I felt was relief, because it was finally good to put Jessamine to rest after all these years. Being killed by an assassin only to be forced inside a heart without any idea how or why you ended up like this is a feeling no one should experience. Jessamine is at fault for what happened to Delilah, but like many of our conversations today, is it the person themselves or the one who caused it? It's always a complex answer, as both women are at fault for what they did. Jessamine was only a child when it happened, and children tend to do stupid things, so to an extent the blame is on her father for overreacting, but she also realized her mistake through our brief conversations with her. Delilah is also to blame for what she did, but being pushed out of the tower at a young age and made to see things no one should see changes you. It doesn't justify her actions, but it's easy to see how one thing led to another. Both women are understandably at fault, which is what makes the Dishonored series such a complex game to discuss. Outside of maybe the Lord Regent who just wanted power for the sake of it, much of the actions people have taken throughout the series, while morally debatable, spawn from their past experiences. Paolo and his Howlers kill rich people, but they do so because they are sticking up for the poor and underserved within Karnaca. Does that make their actions justifiable? Not at all, but it's easy to see the through line of how we get from one place to the next. Honestly, I think Sokolov put it best when talking about Delilah.
She might not give me any choice but to fight. and Delilah deserves whatever she gets.
At my age, I've come to distrust words like deserve. As I've told you, I knew her long ago. Badly wounded, deep at her center, but cunning, and looking for a way to pull herself up. Perhaps more than anything, Delilah had a talent for imagining the world as a better place. If only that could have been channeled towards something less twisted.
In a perfect world, none of this would have happened, but the world isn't perfect, especially not Dishonored's. It's a world rife with conflict and oppression, a world that is harsh and demanding. The world of Dishonored is what shaped the people, and those people in turn made decisions that created unforeseeable outcomes, some small and some large. It's why choice and consequence is such a common theme within this game. Everyone has the ability to make choices, and those choices will inevitably lead to a consequence, whether that spawns from something as simple as lying to not get in trouble or taking the life of another human being. Dishonored is a series of choices, and we must make the ultimate choice of giving up Jessamine's soul to stop Delilah. The final mission of Dishonored 2 sees us returning to Dunwall. They've done it twice already, but I'm telling you, easiest way to my heart. What's great about this specifically is that Dunwall looks a lot different than when we left. Not exactly better, but different, unless you count destroyed buildings and dead bodies laying on the street to be better. When Delilah seized the throne, the Abbey heard word of her heretical rituals being performed by her coven, so they initiated an all-out war on the tower. Even with the aid of the music boxes, they were still no match for Delilah's forces thanks to the clockwork soldiers. The City Watch has also been put on display with their bodies strewn across the tower. It's a wonderful display of her power that also explains what Delilah had actually planned for this whole time. The City Watch, the Duke, everyone but her coven meant nothing. Even Empress of the Isle is small time to her. Just like the DLC, she wants to make her magnum opus, and with her new painting she'd be able to reshape reality itself. She would control the world literally instead of politically. Just like before, we can enter the painting to see what this world looks like, and it paints a pretty clear picture of how Delilah would like to be perceived. She wants all the eyes on her, and the large imposing statue is meant to symbolically display her dominance within her new world. In the real world, Delilah was powerless. She was rejected, tossed aside, and turned away. In her world, no one is more important than her. Delilah's fight has to be one of my favorite non-lethal outcomes, not because of what it means for the story, but in how it's achieved. Entering the arena has you focusing solely on Delilah, only for her to disappear and summon her clones. If you fought off the dozens of clones she sends your way, then she'll eventually face you herself, where you can choke her out if you want to. But because this is Dishonored, there's always another way. Delilah must be in the arena, but if she isn't on the throne, where is she? Well, directly above you. If you go along the side of the wall, you can traverse your way up to the top and defeat her that way, skipping the long and tedious fight. Once knocked out, she can be placed on her throne alongside a corrupted rune. This causes her to wake up, thinking that she won before gleefully entering the painting, not knowing that she's been tricked again. The ending will elaborate more on this decision, as apparently it's not like the first game where Delilah was trapped in the void. Since the painting was meant to be a new world, or the idea of one, she actually enters a fake world where she does rule as Empress. The narration further talks about the wars and voyages she went on during her term, ending the game with a rather wholesome twist. As I've said many times before, while I don't agree with Delilah's actions, I do sympathize with her upbringing. It's hard not to have a jaded view of the world when you're tossed onto the street as a child. This ending in turn allows you to grant her that lifelong wish that she so desires, while satisfying both parties. Both women the empresses of their own worlds, as long as Delilah doesn't accidentally shatter the illusion. Bringing about Delilah's end finally brings us to the end of the game. Like Dishonored 1, your actions affect the post-game world, but it's a bit more than just the chaos system that's in play here. While chaos plays a major factor, it's not the de facto decider when it comes to the endings. The first light is a great example, which has so much complexity it might even rival Fallout New Vegas at times of how many options there are. This slide showcases who rules Serkonos and how. However, there does appear to be a canon choice thanks to the book The Return of Daud, where Paolo and his Howlers were chosen by Emily to rule Serkonos. Kinda removes the entire discussion I had planned for this section, so let's just assume that didn't happen and just humor me for a few minutes. All of this depends on the status of Paolo, Vice Overseer Byrne, the Duke Body Double, and the other key targets allied with Delilah. If you made a choice in the Turf War, either the Howlers or the Abbey, then they control Karnaca. If you made a choice along with allying with the Body Double, then they are overruled. The leaders of the gangs take precedent, but only in high chaos. If it's low chaos, then they answer to Armando. If both gang leaders are dead, or you didn't side with either group, but the Body Double is alive, then he by default rules Karnaca. If all three of them are dead though, then no one leads Karnaca, forcing the people to come together and do it themselves. Alternatively, Corvo has a chance of becoming the Duke of Serkonos if the Duke is dead and the Turf War is unresolved. Plus, you must also consider that the chaos system will affect whether these individuals rule with compassion or authority. I know that was probably a little confusing, but holy hell is that a lot of choices, and this is just the first slide. The next one discusses how the Empire will be ruled. Like the previous game, low chaos is the best outcome, with high chaos being the worst. The difference being is that in high chaos, you have the option of keeping the other protagonist in stone, letting Emily rule alone as Emily the Butcher. But this also applies to Corvo, meaning Corvo has the opportunity to keep Emily petrified in stone, letting him rule as Corvo the Black. A ruthless killer is now on the throne, just like the masked man he was in Dishonored 1. Admittedly, there is no logical explanation I can think of as to why Corvo would keep Emily sealed in stone, but man, that is still an incredibly dark ending. And the last two are the easiest of the bunch to understand, as Sokolov either travels the world until the end of his days, or lives in regret until his passing, with Billy Lurk walking away hoping to reconnect with Daud again. The game does surprisingly give you a chance to kill them in the final mission if you want to, but the only difference is that they won't have an end slide if they die. With this many choices in play, it actually gives us a chance to talk about what's most ideal for the Empire. Naturally, Emily ruling the throne in low chaos is the best outcome. As for Corvo, him being Duke is actually an outcome I disagree with. Firstly, getting this outcome as far as I'm aware requires you to play as Corvo, as there's no option to place Corvo as Duke while playing as Emily. And as we've already established, Emily's journey is canon, so that can't be possible. Even if it was, it goes back to what we said before about Emily not learning anything from the journey if she was never on one. She would just go back to ruling childishly as Empress, but now with her only adult figure in a different isle. It wouldn't be effective for the long-term health of the Empire. So to me, Emily and Corvo have to return to their old positions. The ruler of Serkonos, though, is a bit of a tricky one, mainly due to how many different options there are. As while some are admittedly quite small, as this game has shown us, small choices can have big consequences. Personally, I think my preferred outcome is either the people governing themselves or having the body double Armando take over. Both outcomes with low chaos provide the most hope for the nation. The outsider, who narrates these slides, says that the nation seems to prosper either way, so both seem to be good outcomes. However, if key figures are alive, like Paolo, Overseer Byrne, and the other targets, then they could be a part of Armando's council. Stilton and Hypatia joining the council is a no-brainer, and Paolo and Byrne, while tricky, could create a compromise between the two groups. Paolo just wants what's best for the lower class, while Byrne wants his religious order to be recognized and have authority. Paolo could be Armando's ear for issues on the poor, giving him reports and stats so he could evaluate what to do. And Byrne can continue to act like the Abbey always has, but with harsh restrictions on their jurisdictions. But the people governing themselves could lead into a stronger society, now that there isn't a governing body holding them down. Either option is my preferred choice if I had to pick though, but regardless, this brings us to the end of Dishonored 2. While I still prefer the first game, it's hard not to see how impressive the sequel is at doing exactly what it wanted to do. Gameplay-wise, it added new content and changes that were a direct response to the criticism many players had about the first game. The new location and new characters let us explore a new side of Dishonored that for the time has been unseen, while also keeping the spirit of the original game intact by making its choices and consequences important. At the end of the day, a sequel should be out with the old and in with the new when it comes to bad decisions, and the polishing of the old guard when it comes to the good ones, and Dishonored 2 executes that perfectly. It's one of my favorite sequels to one of my favorite games of all time. The only thing that's missing is DLC. Outside of some excellent additions like New Game Plus and Permadeath, time trial and story-driven content like those from the first game are missing from this entry. Extra downloadable content can help extend the life of a game and offer new storylines left unresolved, but Dishonored 2 never had any. But that's not to say that Arcane didn't try, it's just that when they did, the original plan grew so large, they ended up making it into its own game. And that standalone game was the final entry in the Dishonored series, Death of the Outsider. The one plot thread out of the dozens we've seen come and go that is still left unattended to after all these years is the Outsider. And so, it's finally time to bring this era of the series to a conclusion by removing its last loose thread. The Outsider has been in the background this whole time, occasionally popping in to give us new powers and speak cryptically about what's about to come before leaving and watching the chaos unfold. He's given people the power to change the world, but that power is better left to the void, so it's time to end this once and for all. Death of the Outsider's biggest strength is the central focus on its title. It never deviates from its description in any way. We aren't spending any time learning about the politics of the city or the corruption that infests every corner, it's just the Outsider. But as I said, this was meant to be a DLC, so don't expect another multi-mission endeavor. Death of the Outsider is exactly half the length compared to the other Dishonored titles. As such, things needed to be altered and removed, such as the Chaos system, which for the first time does not make an appearance in a Dishonored title. While I will miss the system, why bother when the game is only 5 missions long? It only worked from a narrative angle with the DLCs as they conveniently served as mid- and endpoint evaluations. Plus, as we've already established, the Outsider, while not the system itself, does use his power to push us into making decisions that would affect our chaos. Whatever we do to the Outsider is going to have drastic consequences, so a chaos system would mean nothing if our final choice is going to be the grandest of them all. Now, it's not to say Death of the Outsider doesn't have choice, it's just not as focused on grand sweeping decisions that echo throughout the playthrough. At most, you might find a newspaper that mentions the death of a major character you killed in a prior mission, but there aren't as many drastic changes like character opinions or placement of enemies. Powers have also been overhauled, runes are completely gone as well as the abilities that be bought with them. Instead, you get 3 abilities right at the start of Mission 2 and get unlimited mana, letting you use them whenever you want. Keeping the theme of the powers reflecting the personality of the wielder, Billy gets a slightly altered version of Blink and Dark Vision, with Semblance letting her assume the identity of whoever she targets, just like her Megan Foster identity. Bone charms have been kept the same, but there are tons more than before, as some of them are the same abilities you would have bought with the runes like the double jump. Death of the Outsider likely learned a lot from the DLCs, as neither of those were long enough to justify an entire skill tree. The game is essentially one last hurrah before the end, so no need to bother with upgrades and bonuses, or even designing the game to force them into a playstyle so they can achieve a specific ending. Just give the player everything but the kitchen sink, and let them have fun. As alluded to earlier though, the main character of Death of the Outsider is Billy Lurk. Corvo's story was finished with Dishonored 1 and Emily with 2, plus they both have an empire to run. Billy is the only one who is able-bodied enough to do such a thing who also isn't bogged down by real-life responsibilities. But her journey to defeat the Outsider didn't start as such. As the ending of Dishonored 2 showed, her plan was to reunite with Daud, and for the past few months that's who she's been trying to find. But as you would expect, Daud is quite the hard target to track down. She seems to have found a major lead here in Karnaca though, as a gang called the Eyeless is hosting a boxing ring with members who apparently use black magic, so Billy's going to see if Daud is present. While Daud's presence is still unknown, something that is present is Billy's right arm. This then means that canonically Emily knocked out Stilton, which altered the present. Don't get too comfortable though, she'll lose her arm soon enough. Within Billy's room here on the Dreadful Whale is also a picture of Deirdre, the girl Billy fell in love with. The reason I bring up Deirdre again is because she apparently gave Billy a heart of some kind that allows her to listen to rats. Gameplay-wise, listening to them could give us hints regarding alternate pathways. I have no idea why this was specifically added into the game, but it's still quite cute to converse with them on occasion. Somehow that's not the strangest part about this mission or game, as when we approach closer we meet this so-called eyeless gang who have Daud strapped to a chair, suppressing him with magic so that he can't use his powers. To get him out, we'll have to remove the suppressors surrounding him, which is unfortunately right in the middle of the room. But Daud will thankfully clean house the moment he escapes, so feel free to let him loose on the gang. Not like the chaos system is here to keep track anymore, right? Just like the intro to Dishonored 2, I think it also puts into perspective just how deadly these abilities are. When playing, it's hard to see the other side of things. Watching someone use Blink and immediately leave without even a second of time going by shows just how deadly these abilities really are. I also love how all the Eyeless members will run away the moment the lever is flipped, even if you were in the middle of combat with them. They know that Daud is loose, and nothing is more important in this moment than putting a country mile between him and them. Once he's back on the ship though, Daud clues us in on his plan, which as the title of the game suggests is to kill the Outsider. After tracking down dozens of cults for years, he stumbled upon the Eyeless, who according to him are different than any other cult he's ever investigated. That's because they have a relic in their possession, a knife, the knife that killed the Outsider 4,000 years ago. So a little background. Back in Dishonored 2, the Outsider briefly talked about his death. Despite what you may think, the Outsider wasn't always a god. He was, like all people, human. As a young boy, he was dragged from his home by a cult. According to them, they looked upon the stars and within its patterns saw that the cosmos was telling them to kill the boy. They then strapped him to an altar and stabbed him to death with a twin-bladed knife. This ritualistic act is how the Outsider was born. From then on, he was one with the Void, but that's not to say he was the owner of it, nor was he the first to arrive there. Harvey Smith, writer and creative director for the series, discussed the properties of the Void in various tweets, which claim that the Void hungers for a godlike entity to represent it, and that the Outsider is that current representative. The Void has existed since presumably the beginning of time, and in that time has had many entities reside here. Many have come before the Outsider, and many will likely come after. So the Outsider isn't a god hell-bent on destroying the mortal world, he's a victim of his environment, killed by those with more power than him. It's why his inclusion in this story has always fascinated me. He bestows his powers to the less fortunate. Instead of taking it away, he provides it, and he specifically targets those who've been beaten down by society. Within Dishonored is a monograph called Can the Outsider Speak? An analysis of his visitations. This was written by a member of the Cult of the Outsider, not to be confused with the Eyeless. They are another smaller group that lives in the outskirts of society who have actually entered the Void. Within its chapters, the author hopes to create a definitive guide about the Outsider regarding his sightings and actions within them. He says, quote, "The Abbey of the Everyman warns that the Outsider walks among them, but to them he's merely the stranger who tempts you to infidelity, or the pickpocket who robs you of trinkets. This naturally confuses him as the group knows more about the Outsider than anyone else and knows where he actually resides. But in a future chapter he says, however, if these stories are to be believed, then we must question the extent of his power in the Void. Does he choose these dialogues consciously?" Further down is also, "We must consider then the possibility of the Outsider's own agency in these encounters. Does the void itself direct his attentions? Or does the boy the envision submerge into the ether of that place so long ago still retain a portion of his memory, his consciousness, and indeed, his desires? That's why it's my belief that the Outsider chose those who are marked with purpose. The Outsider, like these individuals, were outcasted through some outside force and now have to fight back. The Outsider might see himself in these people, and so, grants them his powers to see what they may do. That's all well and good, but what's the end goal here? Is it just never-ending play for fun, giving it out to random people over the next millennia for the sake of curiosity, or is there something deeper? I believe so, but that's something we'll have to talk about when we approach the end. But to focus back on the story, Daud wants this knife so that we can kill the Outsider. The man himself seems to know what's up though, as he ambushes Billy and takes her arm and eye. Naturally, the player and Billy are confused with this interaction and wonder why the Outsider chose them, but once again, more on that later. The first step is to locate the leaders of the Eyeless, as they might have information on where the knife is being stored. According to Daud, these members are identified with an esoteric symbol that they have tattooed on them. This tattoo parlor happens to have an appointment book, with two of the more prominent names being Sean Yoon and Ivan Jacoby. Ivan seems to be obsessed with death and the afterlife. When he was a boy, his family had some difficulty with their financials. While his mother would look for more affordable housing, his grandfather decided to seek refuge in the family crypt. Looking up to his grandfather, he joined him there frequently and is where his obsession with death started. And so a group dedicated to worshipping and learning about a boy who died and became a god sounds like the perfect fit for him. As for Sean, he's simply burnt out from making music and thinks that he needs to witness a unique experience in order to rejuvenate this passion, which in this case is seeing the Outsider. Not exactly the most complex of motivations out there, but when it comes to this stuff, I can imagine all the members have different reasons for why they joined. What's rather strange about the group, and something I still can't wrap my head around, is this ritual they have called the Sanguine Infusion. How it works is their donor, who they usually kidnap, is hooked up to a tube that drains their blood while the others are hooked onto the other side. So the donor has their blood in the bloodstream of the other participants. Supposedly this is related to the Outsider, but I'm not entirely sure how. Regardless, it's still a pretty sick depiction of the group's desperate desire to see the Outsider. The whole point of this mission though is to find the keys that Ivan and Sean have, giving you a chance to spare them if you wish. These keys unlock a safe inside the bank which houses the knife that killed the Outsider. Helping us plan this break-in is Daud, who will, unfortunately, pass away by the time we come back. The book The Return of Daud elaborates on his death, as what caused it was an illness. In the book, Daud met with Billy from a future timeline who had already had the Outsider knife in hand. She dropped it during a scuffle, prompting Daud to pick it up, but he was immediately knocked unconscious because of it. The knife seems to have caused this, and due to its unique properties, gave Daud a life-threatening illness. Now, it should be noted that this was published after Death of the Outsider, which explains why Daud never brought any of this up in-game. As much as I would love to ignore this pretty horrible inclusion, it is canon, so I have to mention it. Focusing more on in-game Daud and not book Daud, while I do wish he was more present in the script as it would make his death better, especially given he died off-screen, I can kind of understand what they were going for here. Daud wants to kill the Outsider, but he's got a one-track mind. Billy didn't want to kill him until Daud mentioned it, which he has more compassion and understanding than Daud does. That's going to be useful as we're given a few options to choose from regarding the Outsider's fate. If we play as Daud, choosing any other option than death would go against his character. So Billy being the protagonist and Daud not being able to kill the Outsider himself makes sense. It also connects to the reason why Daud is even doing any of this in the first place. Daud has taken accountability for his actions, but also curses the Outsider for even setting this in motion. He says that the Outsider knew this would happen when Daud got his mark from him, so he knew that the world would delve into chaos because of Jessamine, which is why he puts the blame on him. He does seem to recognize that he is a part of the problem too though, which is why he took on this difficult task. Daud believes that the Outsider and the people like him, those with the mark, need to be gone from this world. The world of Dishonored is not ready for this kind of power, something that is easily reinforced by this entire video. Everything that happened was a result of these powers. These events might have happened anyway, Daud would still be a killer, and Corvo might have still gotten revenge, but the powers helped it become a reality. But that's why we're here, to take on this task in Daud's honor, although your choice at the end might not align with his. Getting there is the issue though, as we don't even know where to start. Through some investigation we managed to find a lead that takes us to the Royal Conservatory again. Since we left back in Dishonored 2, the Abbey has taken to quarantining it, preventing any foot traffic in or out of the building. Right outside, they are burning thousands of books related to rituals, bone charms, spells, and blasphemous stories, along with the ingredients they used in their spells and rituals. They also found a few witches from the Coven and even an eyeless member and are trying to help them therapeutically, which is done by strapping them to a chair and playing overseer music directly at them. Incense is being spread throughout the building to cleanse the heretical magic, and surprisingly, even the oracular order has arrived. Given this was a hideout for Delilah's coven, all the stops have to be pulled out to clean this place up. Not that you needed more, but this mission is another great example of how systematically broken the Abbey is. They exercise their right to do whatever they want to people under the guise that it's healing the world. A young woman nearby is shaken up over the therapy and can barely talk in complete sentences. Brother Cardoza, the leader of this chapter, even attempts to dodge eventual criticism for this act, claiming that these people have a heretical organ inside them that turns the Overseer's soothing music into pain, which is just flat out absurd. Some of the Overseers are even playfully recalling the time when one of them cut out a witch's tongue. The Abbey claims to want salvation for these people, but under the mask they all just prefer if they just went back to where they came from and be one with the void. What's worse is the irony that plagues this entire order. The first is that just like the witches, the order has taken to dissecting the bodies of those they find, presumably to discover the source of their magic. But more harrowing is who is at the top of the conservatory, who is Sister Roswin. She's our target for this mission as she has the silver graph we need on her person, but she may be harboring some dark secrets. Instead of jumping right into combat, you could choose to talk with the sister beforehand. Given their prophetic visions, it's no wonder they know who Billy is and what her mission is. She goes on to say that the eye she was given by the outsider falsified her vision, and that the hand is guided by the outsider. Billy rightfully calls her out for this and questions why they always think the outsider is the problem for everything, further asking if they would also kill the outsider if they had the chance. Sister Roswin lets slip that they have no use for those who don't fear the outsider's power, and that killing him would dismantle all that they have built. A question you might have had throughout the video is what would happen to the Abbey if the outsider is gone. If their whole purpose is to destroy this being, then what will they become when he's dead? Sister Roswin wants to keep the outsider alive because that lets them gain power. The Abbey has ties to every isle in the Empire, their reach and power is huge, and all of this would disappear if the outsider is gone. Funnily enough, Sister Roswin is once again correct, as a future book I'll talk about later shows that the Abbey was being dismantled shortly after the death of the outsider. It was admittedly for a totally different reason than this, but it is fair to say that without the outsider, the Abbey is useless. This to me speaks volumes towards the Abbey's corruption. While Sister Roswin might not speak for all the sisters, she is not only one of the highest members in the Order, but the Abbey act on their every word. So as long as Sister Roswin doesn't reveal the fate of the outsider, then the Abbey can continue to stay in power. Plus it works in her favor because how would you exactly prove the death of a god, a being that less than a dozen people have actually seen? But it's not just her that's the problem, as it's arguably the entire sisterhood. Death of the outsider has what's called contracts, some side objectives you can complete within a mission, like kidnap this guy or steal this item. One of these contracts involves finding her book of prophecies. Reading it shows that on the 17th in the month of rain, she witnessed the final moments of the outsider within the void. Not to spoil the ending, but the vision is right on the money. It will be his final moments. This isn't the first time they were correct with the prophecy though. Back in Dishonored 2, the sister saw visions of the Order fighting Delilah's coven only to fail miserably, something that did indeed happen before we arrived. So apparently magic is heretical unless it's used by them, as there is no logical explanation for how the oracular order is able to see these visions. Not even something as simple as the will of God would work because they don't serve one. It's mentioned in a few passages that the sisters do regularly meet and discuss political matters, so it's possible that it's not prophecies but just the will of the world. For example, Delilah wanted the throne, but Delilah was stopped, but now she has returned, so it's fair to assume that she will want the throne again. That's a logical assumption that can be made by observing past actions and patterns, which could explain their prophecies. But the almost perfect precision in their description, from one of the Overseers being left alive to the High Overseer's body being hung to surprise the one who returns to Dunwall, leads me to believe that they use some degree of magic in their rituals, magic that is apparently not deemed heretical because it benefits them. Earlier in the month of Harvest, she also witnessed some political unrest in Morley, which led to one of the lords assassinating their rival at a feast. She plans to send Overseers there before it happens, proving that once again they are not only enforcing laws out of their jurisdiction, but they can now prosecute people for a crime that they will eventually commit. Even if that was going to happen, that is horrible evidence. But as we've seen time and time again, the Abbey rarely needs any, just an Overseer in good standing. Despite keeping these secrets about the outsider to herself, we were still able to find it, including the silver graph which points to Shindere North Quarry, our next and final destination. This quarry is where the cult of the outsider is located, the small, more prestigious faction of the Eyeless. The group those within the Eyeless hope to join. To do so, you must relinquish all personal belongings. You are no longer who you were in the outside world. You are now one with the cult, and you must obey that order. Something a bit concerning about their getup is the noticeable gray splotches coating their body. This affliction is connected to the stone beings walking the halls of the cave called Envisioned. This quarry is the one place where the void and the surface of the world are closest. As such, the void itself tends to seep out of its dimension and into the real world. Too much exposure to the void caused the body to petrify over a long period of time, and these Envisioned are some of the original members of the cult from 4,000 years ago. It's a form that's sought after by the current cult as they believe it's the highest form of ascension. The beings don't talk though, merely walk around aimlessly, likely serving as protectors of the void, but their ability to walk through walls is not as simple as it seems. Buried deep within the caves is the Eye of the Dead God, a being who existed long before the outsider, likely the void's previous representative. Touching this reveals overlaps in the cave's design. Parts of it are what was seen earlier, but now new pathways have opened up. It's like opening your third eye, for a lack of a better word. You can now see things more clearly and are able to see the parts most can't. Our new enhanced vision allows us to find a portal that leads to the Ritual Hold, the place where the Outsider has laid for thousands of years. I can't even begin to describe in words what this place looks like. It's otherworldly. There is nothing present here but this large oppressive pillar, giving off a sense of loneliness, a similar feeling the Outsider is likely experiencing. At the center of the large imposing pillar is the Outsider, who is surprisingly stuck in stone. Despite what you may have thought and all the preparing you likely did for an eventual boss fight, he is just sitting there alone. He's a completely open target. You could shove the blade in his chest and move on. It's very anticlimactic, and even the ending is rather sad, as the Outsider realizes that there really were no choices left. He thought that Billy might have made another choice, but that didn't happen, so now he'll die like the rest. While satisfying for some, it's rather antithetical to Dishonored's core design. There's always a choice in these games, but what choice do we have? Well, if you search long enough, you'll find the notes of a cult member named Malchiote. In it, he describes how going to the Ritual Hold is one of the worst offenses one may commit within the cult, and yet he's going to do so anyway. Unfortunately, he never made it, and he was killed before he could, but his notes are still in his locker. The locker itself requires a code, but unlike most safes within the game, there is no lootable solution. But if you've played the series enough, then you already know the code. It's the mark on your hand. This opens up a locker with a diary, revealing the most insane revelation within the series. The mark of the Outsider is not just any old mark. It's the name of the Outsider himself, translated into a language only meant for the dead. Saying his name is how we free him from his eternal binds. Only the dead can speak the language though, which is why we'll have to convince Daud to do it. Within Ritual Hold are a few spirits, including Daud. It's been widely speculated that the Void is an alternate dimension akin to heaven or hell, but many within the world believe that the Void takes all regardless of sin. A note from a member within the cult speculates the opposite. She notes how all the legends and folktales regarding the wandering spirits of the Void are of those who are unhappy. She questions then where the happy spirits reside, leading her to believe that there are no happy spirits here, and that those of goodwill disappear into oblivion, while those who aren't stay here in the Void for eternity. Assuming her hypothesis is true, that would mean that even though Daud tried to steer himself on the path of good in his final days, it still can't make up for the mountain of sins he committed in his past. It's why Billy was the only possible protagonist for this game. I love the guy, but Daud is stuck in his ways. Even after learning of the Outsider's fate, he still wants to kill him, believing that he is the cause for all the pain and death that Daud dealt. Billy, on the other hand, is more compassionate. She's willing to see reason in things that Daud cannot. In fact, Billy uses the parallel of her and the Outsider's story to convince him. Two people who both did something terrible, and yet Daud was able to forgive Billy, so how is this any different? The Outsider never asked for these powers. He was forced into this position. Billy is the opposite to Daud. Whereas Daud sees the Outsider as the one to blame for the chaos that came from his powers, Billy sees her and Daud as the problem, the ones who used it to exploit people. Convincing Daud to forgive the Outsider sees him saying his name, letting Daud pass on and removing the Outsider from his chains. For the first time in 4,000 years, he's free. The ending is extremely poetic. In a game about choices, our final choice is giving the Outsider a choice of his own. When asked about what the Outsider would do after being set free, Harvey Smith jokingly pictured the Outsider sitting at a cafe watching the world around him. Time flies at many different speeds. Sometimes it's fast and it goes by without a flash, sometimes it's interminably, agonizingly slow. But sometimes it's as normal as it goes. Even though time never changes, it feels different depending on the setting, like when you're at work watching the time go by. The only way to feel it pass normally is to be present, not in your mind clouded with your thoughts, not on your phone scrolling through social media, just alive and present, aware of where you are. It's one of the most human feelings out there, being able to just sit down and observe, and the Outsider choosing something like that fits perfectly. Ultimately, at the end of the day, all the Outsider wanted to do was live. At the start of this mission, the Outsider tells Billy that Daud's thoughts have clouded her mind, and that in reality she has a choice that she can make, referring to him being freed. But I believe that this entire trilogy has been orchestrated this way so the Outsider could be freed. Daud was gifted powers by the Outsider, who carelessly killed anyone for coin, while Delilah was given her own power so that she could rise up within the world that had beaten her down. Each of their motivations caused the dominoes to fall into place. Daud killed Jessamine, which not only brought Corvo into the mix, letting him get his own powers, but also forced Daud to confront his actions. Billy recognized that Daud was weakening and so looked for a way to seize the leadership role for herself, and it just so happens that a certain witch was up for a temporary collaboration. Daud then spared Billy, which taught her feelings of forgiveness, and also forced her to leave the gang and start her own life. He would also then defeat Delilah and trap her in the painting for over 15 years. During this time, Emily would become Empress and grew older, which is then when Delilah would come back to take the throne. The Outsider then gave Emily the power she needed to fight back, which is when she would run into Billy. Talking with Emily made Billy reflect on her time with Daud, which is why she sought him out. The Outsider also gave her powers because if she was to be his rescuer, she should be equipped for the upcoming journey. This is also an in-universe explanation as to why we have fully upgraded powers and infinite mana. As for the mechanical hand, well, according to the book The Corroded Man, a man named Zukov went insane after touching the blade, so the Outsider gave her a fake arm so that she could touch the blade without being affected. This is also likely why Daud got his illness from touching the blade. All of this was put in a place that Billy could get here, and it could only be her because again, Daud is not willing to budge on his ideals. He will kill the Outsider no matter what it takes. Billy, on the other hand, could be reasoned with. He has said on many occasions that he can see everything, the past, the present, and the future. The only thing he doesn't know is how these events will play out. He knows the thousands of ways one of our targets might die, but he doesn't know which method we'll choose. So it's fair to assume that he knew how to create a situation that would lead to his release, but he wasn't certain that it would work. It was a massive gamble, but one that paid off. While this being a trilogy-long con is still up for debate, it's clear from our talks with him throughout the game that the Outsider did want to live. It's such a beautifully well-made decision, as it's not only the biggest, most impactful choice in the entire series, but the themes of forgiveness and choice come through even in the game's final moments. Absolutely everything in this game is connected, and it comes to a head with this final choice of how we decide the fate of the one who gave us our fates so long ago. That does beg the question though, with the Outsider gone, what happens to the Void? Well, the Veiled Terror will clear that up. Said after the events of Death of the Outsider, the book focuses once again on Billy. In it, it explains how after the Outsider was removed from the Void, the people of Dunwall started having constant nightmares. Emily has also completely dissolved the Abbey of the Everyman, and the Sisters of the Oracular Order are apparently being hunted down by the Grand Guard because of a vision they saw after the Outsider left the Void. All of this is happening while Void Rifts are appearing in the sky. This then ends up leading Billy to the Isle of Morley, where she ends up coming across the Void Shadow, a being from the Void that can hop timelines who is trying to make certain events set in stone so it can presumably take over the world. Billy also ends up getting help from a future version of herself, which kind of comes out of left field, but thankfully she's able to stop its conquest. She will then return the Outsider's knife to Emily, who herself is planning on devising a plan to remove the rest of the Void Rifts within the Empire, bringing a rather strange end to the Dishonored timeline. Regardless of the book's quality, Death of the Outsider was a welcome surprise. I hadn't played this game until this video, having put it off for years, but I was surprised at its value. It doesn't reach the same highs that the rest of the series does, but it reaches its own peak using its own playstyle. Death of the Outsider was made to wrap up the Caldwin era of Dishonored, a send-off so that Dishonored could move on from this era and into another, and so Arcane could move on to other projects, and it did so by solely focusing on the last loose thread yet to be cut. I said at the beginning of this video how the Outsider is one of the most fascinating characters in the Dishonored universe, and I hope now you can see why. A child who was no different than anyone around him, who against his own volition became a god. He's got such an incredible backstory and history that merely referencing his events within a game wouldn't do him justice. To cap off his story, a whole game would be required to do so. Its ending also tied its theme of forgiveness and choice, something that started all the way back in the first game, into its ultimate conclusion, creating a strong link between it and the rest of the series, preventing itself from its fate of becoming that weird piece of side material that no one talks about, even if that did end up becoming its reputation anyway. More than anything, it was a great conclusion, as it finally brings us to the end of Dishonored. Or does it?
Ugh, you always fall for the same old shit. Just once, please, can you try your hardest to make this interesting?
If you're confused why Deathloop is in this video, then you're feeling exactly how I felt a couple months ago. Whenever I make these videos, I always start by looking on the official Wikipedia page. This is so I can look at what games there are in the series and what DLCs came with it, just to make sure I've got everything covered. This isn't as difficult for games like Dishonored, but for something like, say, Far Cry, it can get a bit complicated. So imagine my surprise when I checked the Dishonored page and lo and behold, Deathloop was a part of it. The reasoning spawns from a comment made by its director Dinga Bakaba, who says that the game exists in the same universe as Dishonored but far after the events of Death of the Outsider. That leaves me in a very precarious situation. While I'm not usually one to debate a dev on their own game, especially one like Dinga, who was lead designer and producer on both Dishonored 2 and Death of the Outsider, I'm almost certain 99% of you clicked on this video expecting Dishonored and not Deathloop. Plus, I wasn't even sure how much of a connection there actually was. According to Dinga, there are references to Dishonored in Deathloop and vice versa. But I just played all of these games for this video and even played many of them, including Deathloop, on release, and I can say that I've never seen a single connection. I had to look it up just to make sure I wasn't insane, and sure enough, there are some connections. The issue is that they are so small that I would have passed them off as a cheeky reference, or something completely unrelated had I not known this was in the same universe. Still, for the sake of thoroughness, it's at least worth covering how this connects to Dishonored. For some background, Deathloop starts in the 1900s, so at minimum, it's roughly 50 years after Death of the Outsider. The protagonist this time around is Colt, who is stuck in a loop of death. A death loop. He realizes after some time that in order to break the loop he has to kill all 7 visionaries on the island in one night. Their essence is tied to the loop, so killing them will loosen their hold on it. However, mechanically it's not that simple. There are 4 locations and 4 times of day, so you'll have to go to one location each time. More pressing is that the visionaries also move around throughout the day, never staying in one location, making it impossible to just visit any location at any time. For instance, Dr. Gingy and Igor stay in their labs all night due to some groundbreaking experiment they discovered. That complicates things quite a bit as Alexis throws a party at night and only appears during that time. But if we sabotage Igor's experiment in the morning, while also synthesizing Alexis's voice in order to convince Gingy to come to the party, then they'll have no choice but to show up. Killing 3 birds with 1 grenade, gun, machete, and even a host of magical powers. So the entire point of the game is assembling the pieces of your Rube Goldberg machine, and then once you've got everything in place, initiate the start sequence and hope it works. This is the core of Deathloop, spending hours figuring out what works and what doesn't, and then eventually assembling the puzzle pieces into a design of blood, guts, and corpses. Stopping us from completing this beautiful piece of macabre art is 2 things. One are the Eternalists and the Visionaries. The Visionaries are the leaders of the island, so it's best to think of the Eternalists as their lackeys. Unknown and unnamed people who help and obey the Visionaries, which also means that they'll kill us on sight due to their orders. The other is Juliana, who within a second becomes the biggest hurdle the player has to cross. Juliana can sometimes invade your game like some kind of Dark Souls invader. She's equipped with her own set of powers and weapons, making her a balanced adversary. Upon spawning into the game, she'll also lock the tunnels you used to escape, forcing you to disable the radar signal somewhere within the map. Whether you choose to do this after she's been dealt with or in the middle of the hunt is entirely up to you. Juliana can also be controlled by another player, adding a PvP feel to the game, although you can choose to keep this on single player mode, letting her be controlled by an AI instead. Dying at any point during the loop comes with a deadly consequence, as it resets the loop back to the beginning of the day. Thankfully, you are given a few retries in the form of revives that recharge back to full when you enter a new location, but if you spend through all of them, death will reset your progress. However, like Juliana, you could set the difficulty yourself in the settings, to as low as 1 or as high as 5. There's even a godlike setting that gives you infinite revives if you'd like to take the game slow, or like me, used it as a post-game option to clean up files and notes you didn't find without the looming threat of death hounding over you. But while this does answer what Deathloop is about, it doesn't really answer the connection to Dishonored. But if you do look hard enough, the signs are there. The game's setting is the island of Blackreef. Blackreef back in the day used to be a small fishing village in the Isle of Tivia. But after death of the Outsider, the Empire fell into decline, causing Tivia to secede from the rest of the Empire and become the Motherland. Blackreef Island is a very strange place, as some time ago, before the Motherland was established, an anomaly of some kind appeared on the island. Given the game's connection to Dishonored, it's heavily implied that this was caused by the Outsider being removed from the Void, and could further be a result of those Void Rifts that the Veiled Terror talked about. Eventually, the Motherland put together a task force of people and started Operation Horizon, which was created to study the anomaly and its properties. The expedition went south almost immediately, as Colt used a makeshift rocket to fly into the anomaly only to be caught in the time loop it creates. He was stuck there for over 17 years before he escaped via suicide. After escaping, he was naturally placed into an asylum due to his delirium, until a few years later when members of the Aeon Project would buy his release. This program was started by our visionaries who come from all walks of life, some scientists, some artists, some just extremely wealthy. Each wanted to explore and experience the anomaly for different reasons. Dr. Gingy specifically wanted to study the anomaly, and through her research was able to harness the power of the anomaly, which is how the loop was created this time around. Due to its nature, the time loop would let them live out the same day every day for the rest of eternity. While the outside world will crumble, the island will party like it was 1960. I think Deathloop's greatest aspect of writing are the visionaries. Each of them have opinions about each other and such pronounced personalities that they all feel completely unique. Alexis, for instance, is maybe the funniest but most insecure character in the whole game. Firstly, his group chat handle is AlphaWolf69, which should speak to his maturity, but when Juliana was interviewing the visionaries about their qualities, Alexis would not stop talking. When you synthesize his voice in order to get Dr. Gingy to show up, you first need an audio recording of his voice, which is inside this statuette, and I'm fairly certain he talked for at least 7 minutes before it shut off. Alexis loves himself just as much as he loves talking about himself thanks to his inflated ego. Some of the members are not like Alexis though, and did actually come here for research and scientific discovery, which ended up leading to the creation of these slabs and trinkets. These mechanically replace the runes and bone charms from Dishonored, but oddly enough show the passage and evolution of time just through their inclusion. The slabs act like Dishonored's runes, magical powers that you can cast, some of which are directly from Dishonored, like Blink and Domino, now called Shift and Nexus. Trinkets are passive buffs added to your weapons, like faster fire rate, more headshot damage, etc. These are similar to Dishonored's bone charms, which also provide passive buffs. Their inclusion though shows that the world has evolved from a spiritual world to a more scientific one. Harnessing the powers of the Void was done through communion and prayer, using rituals and effigies to create powers. Here in Deathloop, this power is scientific, using logic, numbers, formulas, and math. The world of this series has evolved from using less magical and primitive methods of evolution by instead looking at the science of how things work, similar to how our own world is much more advanced than that of our ancestors was back in the 1800s. Where things started to go wrong, though, was after their first day of Forever started. While the first day started in 1960, the current date is actually somewhere in the year 2200, yet not a single person on the island knows this except Juliana and Colt. All of the Visionaries and Eternalists are aware of the loop, but are not aware that the loop has already started. They all still think it's their first day on the island, even though their real first day was over 100 years ago. Juliana isn't off the hook though, as she has her own problems to deal with. Dr. Gingy has a note titled Possible Side Effects, which refers to the possible side effects that could occur within the loop. One is called sundowning, which is the failure to process centuries or more of experience. Obviously, the human body, while capable, struggles the older it gets, leading to lots of physical pain and a loss of mental capabilities. Juliana, however, has gone through over 100 years of experience in the mind and body of someone in their mid-20s. That is just not possible, reinforcing the supernatural elements of the island. To off-gas this, she's basically removed parts of her memory. It's like cleaning out a hard drive. You're full on space, so something has to go. I don't believe it's ever explained how her technique called memory compressing actually works, but it's a technique she's utilized over the years. This loss of memory, though, is what sparked much of the current plot. Either a few days or years into the loop, Colt decided he wanted out. It's unclear why he ever did, but I'm willing to assume it was some kind of PTSD that manifested due to his first time in the loop back in the 30s. Breaking the loop is the same solution as before, the death of the Visionaries. This was easy back then as Colt was the only one there, but now we have 9 leaders, Colt, Juliana, and the other 7 Visionaries. After years and years of trying though, he was unsuccessful. Unlike the other Visionaries who had no idea Colt was killing them loop after loop, Juliana, sick of the whole ordeal, fought back and is now actively preventing Colt from succeeding. Originally, it was out of retaliation, before it eventually just became fun. She loves the cat and mouse game these two have, her being the hunter and Colt being the hunted. This is reinforced as such every single morning. According to her, Juliana is the first one to wake up. So if she really cared about the science and wanted to make sure Colt didn't ruin the good thing they had, she would wake up, kill him, and then go back to bed. But Juliana doesn't care about that. She loves the chase. This idea that Colt might escape, the thrill of possibly losing, is what invigorates her to get up in the morning and chase Colt. However, Colt started slipping. He started forgetting everything, the loop, the people, and his goal. The very first scene of the game shows Colt being pinned down by Juliana before being stabbed with a knife. Colt in this moment has no clue who Juliana is or where he ended up, even thinking that this fight was a weird nightmare he was having when he wakes up the following morning. This made Juliana bitter. It's no longer fun anymore when your nemesis is no longer as passionate as you are. But once we do control Colt, that memory is back and she couldn't be happier. Colt isn't fully there yet, and as the player it's up to you to guide him to this info that you and him are learning, both about this place and its history, but he did retain his goal of escaping. As you can tell, outside of the setting and some outside world elements, most of this game seems disconnected to Dishonored, which is why I had trouble even recalling things that were connections at all. It's honestly really strange, as this game is trying to have it both ways at once. 99% of the in-game mechanics and lore is self-contained, focusing on the island, its inhabitants, and its history. Every now and then, though, something from Dishonored is either referenced or can be inferred to be from the universe thanks to the knowledge of knowing that they coexist together. I don't think it's a problem, but it's just a bit concerning the amount of times I had to snap myself back into place, as if I was trying to recall my own memories, constantly telling myself that this was after Death of the Outsider, despite none of the game's elements even attempting to convince me that it was. Still, I did enjoy the uniqueness of Deathloop's story. I still found the gameplay to be lacking in replayability, despite there being a major selling point, but the story and the ensuing mystery were always quite fascinating to me, especially since the game added a new ending after I stopped playing. When Colt kills all the Visionaries, he rides his rocket to Juliana's base inside the large ball located on the island. This is a rather awkward conversation, as it's discovered a few minutes before that Juliana is actually Colt's daughter. It adds the horror of the island, as Colt had to kill his daughter day after day, not just back then, but now here again, as her essence is tied to the loop. This would also mean that Juliana is hunting her dad, but of course she's less sympathetic about the whole thing, as she only did this after Colt started killing her. Before any more deaths can occur though, Juliana talks to Colt and basically asks if he wants to stay. There's a rather impressive meta-message in this conversation. Colt and Juliana have a strained relationship, and staying here together is a way for them to repair it. If you select this route, Juliana meets Colt on the beach and the two of them discuss what they want to do today. She even calls him dad for the first time. Their relationship is healing, all thanks to the blood sports that ensue within the loop, but it heals regardless. But it's a question for Colt just as much as it is one for the player. Do you really want to give up the loop after all this time? By now, you'll have known Blackreef like the back of your hand, and like Juliana, you'll likely try different tactics to pass the time, killing the Visionaries in different ways, using different abilities. In the beginning, the world felt hostile, oppressive. You felt like one against the many struggling to survive. But now that you have survived and proved that you could escape, what's one more run? For old time's sake. Maybe try out that weapon you tossed away or that strategy you never used. It's not like this is your last shot. You can always start again tomorrow, right? Staying with Juliana keeps the loop going, letting you have more fun, while destroying it means losing all of it. From a game design perspective, I could see why they didn't do this, but I really wish that ending the loop actually did end things. We talked about the game Nier Automata a few months ago, and I mentioned how completing ending E in that game gives you the option of deleting your save file in order to help other players. Deathloop sadly doesn't do that. Choosing either option just takes you back to the beginning, letting you still live out those desires. You could choose to reset Cole's progress yourself in the menu, but I really wish they forced you to sacrifice the memories and builds you created in that moment. The other side of the message is still there though, with the loop continuing due to the player realizing that living in this playground of death is really fun when you could be any threat that comes your way. How you determine that ending is a duel, using old-fashioned pistols reminiscent of the same pistols used by the City Watch. Originally what happened was that you would shoot Juliana and then jump off the platform. You would then wake up the next morning with the sky being noticeably more orange. Juliana walks over, pointing her gun at you, attempting to end your life before vanishing, never to be seen again. At the time, I remember not enjoying this ending that much as it felt rather hollow given all we accomplished. A future update added an extended version of this, now deemed by the community as the Golden Loop ending. Once Juliana disappears, Colt goes back to Blackreef and starts helping everyone pack up and leave. Unlike before, none of them are hostile due to Juliana's absence. Every morning she would get on the loudspeaker and say that Colt was betraying the program, since the Visionaries still believe it's their first day on the island. Now that Juliana left early, she never had time to make the announcement. Everything is back to normal, and no one thinks Colt is betraying them. What follows is a look at the Visionaries and their reactions to the world outside the loop. It's nice to finally see their faces up close, since most of the time they're being shot at from afar, so it's kinda hard to get a good look at things. The orange sky though is what adds the ambiguity of the ending. It's my personal belief that the outside world, at least recently, had always looked like this. But thanks to the loop being broken, the veil placed around the island has been lifted, letting everyone see what the real world has looked like. At the heart of this ending though is a question, of whether we should confront the uncomfortable truth or stay within the comfortable lies. It's not a question that is posed at the moment of decision, but rather after. No one on the island, including the player, knew that this is what the world would look like. Now that we do know though, would it have been better to just stay within the loop, away from whatever the world is now? Or is it still worth going through it anyway, even if it's not the outcome that we hope for? It's also worth considering that these are real people. They might not remember the day once it's reset, but they are real people with emotions. And the only ones benefiting from this charade are Juliana and Colt, who kill and maim anyone and everyone without consequence. It's an impressive question and message to pose to the player, and it's the rare kind of message that only a game could provide. Tying together the villainy of trapping people in an endless loop and your insatiable urge to keep playing only works in video games because of the interactivity. More impressive though is this orange sky, which might have been hinted at all the way back in Dishonored 1, as a quote from Jessamine talks about the void being the place that will devour all the lights from the sky. This sky, however it came to be, could have been a result of the void seeping into the world, even further than the void rifts and are actually consuming the known world, leaving nothing but a broken sky. It's both an ending that has closure, finally providing an end to Deathloop's story, while also setting up the future of the world. Will a Deathloop 2 continue from here? Would a Dishonored 3 even start here, or would it be back in the past? It's a question that will remain unanswered for the time being, as for now, this is where the Dishonored timeline would finally come to an end. Dishonored is one of the best set of games I've ever played. A game that has endlessly replayable levels, an incredibly stylish art design, and an extremely tight and focused gameplay experience. The gameplay through and through was fantastic. There are small hitches here and there, but overall each one of them feels incredible to play. Stealth-focused games have always been a favorite of mine, but it's the immersive sim elements that really brought out its best qualities, offering numerous solutions to every hurdle in the player's way, giving them a feeling of power and triumph by letting them know that their weird and wacky solution is entirely possible. Being able to express yourself through gameplay is what makes games the incredible medium that they are. Many games are great at doing this, immersive sims are usually the best, and Dishonored is towards the top of that list. Maybe not the best in the genre, but nowhere near a benchwarmer. Easily able to stand amongst the greatest, even those that released 20 years ago, that are still considered the best the genre has to offer. But while the gameplay is great, the story was on a whole nother level. An extremely complex series of choices and consequences, resulting in a trilogy of games that are all connected to one another in some way. The personal stories of Billy, Emily, and Corvo were all incredible, and being able to see and experience the world through their eyes lets you connect with them on a deeper level. And finally, being able to wrap up the story of the Outsider was the cherry on top of this delicious void-filled cake. These game design decisions even add to those aforementioned choices, letting you not just see the world but change it, for better or worse. The story, like its gameplay, has a plethora of agency on the part of the player, letting them make their own decisions not just in moment-to-moment engagements but in overarching narratives, giving you a chance to actually change the world you inhabit and then living with the consequences. As I've said many times before, Dishonored is a game of choices. Now it's time for me to make the ultimate choice of finally bringing an end to this video. Thanks for watching. Thank you all for watching today, and I hope you enjoyed. I've been meaning to get to Dishonored for a while, so I'm glad this project is finally complete. Not sure what video I'll cover next, but Stalker 2 is releasing in September, and I think a back-to-back Stalker and Metro video would be quite cool. Elden Ring's DLC is also releasing in June, so I plan on making a video just on the DLC, as well as another one a couple weeks later that contains both the main game and DLC, so we can finally wrap up all of Elden Ring's story together. Outside of that though, we'll have to see what the future holds. As always, be sure to check up on the community tab as I update you all on the progress of each video I make, just like I did with this one. And finally, like the video if you enjoy, and subscribe if you're new for more content like this. Thank you to my returning viewers for coming back to another video, and take care everyone. Goodbye.